Welcome to SmithWeekly Discussions, an occasional program for our members of SmithWeekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position along with your favorite beverage to enjoy the discussion. We remind our audience to examine our show notes attached to each of our shows to better understand how our program functions. Before we get into our discussion, we want to say thanks for questions coming from the audience at SmithWeekly, including Brent S., Chris P., Cindy W., Matt S., and Andy J. We have a brand new guest on the program today, and one that we're pleased to have join the program. Dr. Thomas Lodi is with us. Thomas is a medical doctor with a number of medical certifications with over 38 years of clinical experience, with the past approximate 23 years focused as an integrative oncologist. Dr. Lodi is founder of An Oasis of Healing, a healing facility based in Arizona, United States, and he has co-founded various clinics in Thailand, India, Malaysia, and Vietnam. Dr. Lodi was the first practitioner to bring integrative oncology to Thailand. You can learn more about Thomas and his work by visiting his websites, drlodi.com, and also by his other website, An Oasis of Healing.com. Dr. Lodi, thanks for joining the program. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on, Thomas. Well, why don't we kick it off here with just you talking about why health and wellness is important, even for an audience such as ours, which is, natural resources, energy, investors, finance types. Obviously, these folks are focused in those areas, but obviously health and wellness are very much associated. And I'd like to have you just kick it off as to why you're here to talk about that and help our audience.
Well, just think of the words we just used here, health and wellness. What we are, what life is energy. The way energy is expressed in biological systems is through is just the flow of electrons. And in fact, that's how your computer is running too. It's the flow of electrons. And so we're really, the only difference, if you looked at the biochemistry of the difference between what's going on with in the computer and you're carbon based, it's silicon based. And then if you look on the periodic table of the chemicals, you'll see that a silicon is on the same vertical column as carbon, which means they both have the same chemical reactivity. That's why they can be interchanged and used together, and they're coming up with all sorts of combinations thereof. So anyway, life is the flow of energy, and when the energy stops flowing, it's all over. And so the difference between a child and an old person is not just the body habitus, but the fact that the child's can't sit still, and the old person is sitting down. They can't get up, or they can get up, but they'd rather sit. And so it's just a matter of energy. The difference between sickness and health has nothing to do with age. You can be very sick at 10 and be extremely healthy at 80 and be running around, and at 10 lying in bed. So it's energy. So sickness and health and life and death have to do with energy. So when you run out of energy, it's all over. So what is health? It's the it's the amount of energy you've acquired. And we've even looked at this in terms of cellular voltage. We know that a cell requires about a negative 25 millivolts to run, 22 to 25. And when you get down to 15 millivolts, you're not going to work that day. You get down to 10, you're not going to get off the couch, and down to 5, you're not getting out of bed. And it's just cellular voltage. If you bang your finger with a hammer and it needs to heal, it'll go up, and you have an acute inflammation. It needs to go to 50 millivolts and stay there for a while, and then it will heal. Now, if you're not that smart and you keep banging your finger with a hammer and it becomes chronically inflamed, you have to get up to minus 70 and hold. Now, what's very interesting is when we talk about cellular voltage, we're talking about the cumulative availability of electrons. Electrons are stored in biological entities in a molecule called ATP. So now, when we talk about pH, something is acidic or alkaline. If it's acidic, that means it's lacking an electron and it will grab it, and that's why acid it becomes harmful. If you put your finger in it, it's because it's grabbing the electrons and it's destroying the tissues. Now, if it's alkaline, it's got extra electrons. So alkaline is donating electrons. Now, if we go to oxidation and antioxidation, which is another physical phenomenon, oxidation is the stealing of electrons. And then antioxidants like vitamin C, vitamin E, what they're doing is donating electrons. So both alkalinity and antioxidation are both really the same thing, and acidity and oxidation. So those two scales are just different ways of describing the same phenomenon. So like looking at a person from the left side of their head and from the
Mm.
right side, you're looking at their from side to side. So it's just looking at the same phenomenon. And then the sum total of those is voltage. So you can put down a voltage scale next to a pH scale and next to an oxidation antioxidation scale. It's called redox. And you can see, well, a pH of 7.57 is where we want to really get to heal because we're putting in lots of electrons. The whole body can't be 7.57 because you'll be dead. But anyway, it's the flow of electrons. And like, for example, people who doubt that, who don't understand that, if you were to come to me and say, uh, can you check my heart out? How's my heart doing? Well, I would listen to it, and then I would do an EKG, and the EKG would show me um, the electrical output. There would be these different waveforms, and they would have a certain proximity to each other, a certain height, a certain width, and all that. By that pattern, I could tell the health of your heart. And when that line is flat, there's no health of your heart anymore. All right, so it's the flow of electrons. Same with an EEG, which is the brain electroencephalogram and all that. So when we're talking about health and
Mm.
energy, they're one and the same. And so the whole idea about being healthy is to keep we have this amazing Earth suit. We need this suit to get around on this planet. Um, and so we need to know what it needs to take care of it so that it can continue to um, take in energy from the environment, utilize it, and then expel whatever it doesn't need, right? And so if you look at the entire universe from supernova to black holes, it's an energy exchange. Everywhere you look, it's just energy exchange. And when you finally get down to the biosphere, where we have biological organism, again, it's energy exchange. And the way in which each organism exchanges energy is through its anatomy and physiology, its
Right.
form and function, right? And so you can look at an organism and you can tell how it obtains energy. And energy is eating and breathing. Those are the ways we do it. So all organisms are doing one of two things: either eating and breathing, or you got to be breathing at the same time. Eating or procreating. That's pretty much the job of biological creatures: to eat or to make offspring. And anyway, so it's very interesting if you look at it that way. You'll understand that yes, I can get away with eating the dog food, sure, but I will never achieve optimal functioning because health needs to be defined in practical, functional terms.
Right.
And health is therefore the optimal functioning of the organism. In order to achieve health, you've got to be able to put an organism in an environment where all of its biological requirements are being met.
Lots of stuff right there to talk about. I want to just one quick follow up there, and then I want to move on to background and experience in a moment. With respect to oxidation in the body, oxidation in some scale is okay or not okay for the body. Talk about that.
Yeah, okay, so the biochemistry of life is called redox. Redox from reduction and oxidation for oxidation. The reduction is the scientific term for antioxidant, and it means reducing. And it's counterintuitive, it's opposite of what you would think. So, but just realize that it's the exchange of electrons. So, for example, what's the difference between a rock and a frog? Okay, so the frog has the ability for redox biochemistry. In other words, it can exchange electrons. It's got so the reducing equivalent, the reductant, the antioxidant donates the electron, and the oxidant grabs it, and then it passes it to a reductant, which passes it to an oxidant, and that's it. So that's the exchange of electrons. So um, in now that exchange of electrons is as important. So in other words, each is important: oxidation and reduction. So in order for us to make energy in our cells, we have mitochondria, and the name of the biology of a mitochondria is oxidative phosphorylation. So in other words, it's oxidizing glucose and glucose and oxygen. And that oxidation product, which we would say is right, normally would say is bad, bad, bad. You have to have antioxidants. Without that oxidation, we would have no energy. We'd have no life. The way in which our adrenal glands make adrenaline is through oxidation. The way that I mean, everything is for every bit of oxidation, there's a reduction. So don't think of either as good or bad, but think of them as day or night. If someone were to say to you, "What's better, day or night?" You'd look at them and not be able to answer because neither is better. They're both required. So they're both required. And so that's the same thing. So balanced redox biochemistry means you're able to you keep your electrons flowing by oxidizing and reducing and oxidizing and reducing. So most of the um, what they call biosynthetic um, activities. So when we make uh, there are 9 essential amino acids. We make the other 11. How do we make them? Through processes called oxidate. We have to use oxidation to get those electrons, to get the energy to make things. But then we need to be able to put the fire out when we need to. So I don't know if I answered that question or not.
And that's good to put it in context because I think everybody thinks of oxidation as potentially bad when in fact it's not. I'd like to move on here just for the sake of time, and we got lots of things to talk about on the program today, but I'd like to have you talk about your background and experience, Thomas, in the medical industry and how that experience in healing people has led you to the work you're doing today.
Yeah, well, actually, it started out before I went to medical school. I was 19 and I was reading a lot of religious texts from all the religions. I was just, I had no uh, what do you call it, prejudice or preference. So I was reading them all. I read Hindu, Buddhist. I read uh, the Old Testament or the Pentateuch, as it's called um, in Jewish religion, and I read that whole book. I read the Book of Mormon. I read Quran. I was just reading it all, and my interest was that pretty much. So I decided that I didn't want to be an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor. There was no role in the Western world that seemed attractive to me because I felt like our purpose was to find our way back. Um, and so I chose went I sold every, I dropped I was at UCLA. I dropped out and bought a one-way ticket to India, and I lived in India for a couple of years on an ashram until one day I realized it's not for me. So I left and hitchhiked around the world for a while. I didn't really like the U.S. Um, from the time I was young. I was like 5. I felt like a stranger there. Anyway, um, so I said, well, I got to get back to the U.S. because I got to learn how to do something. Because everywhere I went, I couldn't work. I didn't have a work permit. I didn't know what to do, and so I said I got to figure out some kind of work. So got back to the U.S. And what made sense to me was the closest thing to my interest, which was, like philosophy and stuff, was psychology. So I went into psychology, went to graduate school, and I graduated as a clinical psychologist. And I practiced psychology for about 3 years until um, it finally I came to understand because I don't understand the body and how it works. I can't really help. I mean, the situation after situation after situation. There was one situation where the final one where and this is why I resigned and I went to medical school was because uh, the nurses that I was the head of a 240 bed facility, uh, and the nurses were complaining that this guy was always causing problems. So I met with him and them and all that, and I came up with a plan and of is a psychological intervention. I went to his doctor and I said, "Here's my plan. What do you think?" And he said, "It's great, but just keep one thing in mind. He has something called alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency." And I said, "Oh, well, what's that?" He doesn't have the ability to produce this. He can't make this one enzyme that is necessary for the liver and the lungs. And as a result, since he was around 3 or 4 or 5, he started to develop emphysema. He couldn't breathe, and he couldn't, and so he was, and emphysema, the air goes in easily. They go, and then they can't blow it out, so they go. It's the opposite of someone with asthma who can't get the air in, but they can get it out easily. So emphysema. So they call somebody with asthma the blue bloater, and the uh, with emphysema the pink puffer, because they okay. So anyway, here he is, and he says, "I want you to realize something." By the time he got to 12, he didn't even have 13. He didn't even have the energy to masturbate, and he's a male like you and I. He's got the same level of hormones, and he's around all these young, beautiful nurses. So, and when I heard that, I said, "Well, there's no way I could have evaluated this situation without that knowledge, because that changed everything. My entire evaluation was wrong completely." I said, I got to go to medical school, period. So I didn't go to medical school to be a doctor. I went to medical school to round out my knowledge. And that's what I did. And so my journey was spirit, mind, body. It was very interesting. So anyway, so that's how I wound up. Then I did my residency in New York at Columbia, and in internal medicine. And then I started an oncology fellow. After you finish internal medicine, you can do one of the subspecialties, which is oncology, hematology, and oncology. I started it, and after about, I think it was 6 months, if I lasted even that long, I had to stop because we were killing people. I saw that we were killing people, destroying their lives, and I couldn't do it. So I left, and I practiced mostly in ICUs, intensive care units, cardiac care units, surgical intensive care units, just because in intensive care you can either help someone or not. And I also would work in emergency rooms because, again, you can help someone or not. So if it's an urgent situation, a traumatic situation, then us MDs, allopathic medicine, that's who you go to see. If the baby's coming out feet first, you don't go to an herbalist, right? So you got to know who to go to when. And so the MDs were really great at you get shot, you got a broken leg, you had a heart attack. Okay. So, but other than that, if you've got a chronic condition, you go the opposite. You run from the allopaths. So that anyway, so that, and um, the thing was is that when I was 14, I was reading Herbert M. Shelton, and everybody's listened to this should read a book called Health for the Millions by Herbert M. Shelton. Terrible title, but it's kind of the Bible on how to take care of yourself, how to stay alive. Anyway, I was reading that at 14, so there was no way I would ever want to be a doctor, ever. I would never have chosen it, never. Because why would I want to be a doc? Why? Because the whole paradigm of the doctor's brilliant, the patient's stupid, and the stupid patient comes to the brilliant doctor, and the brilliant doctor fixes the patient. It's not even. That's just a myth. It has nothing to do with anything. And then you got the disease model where there's these diseases out there and they're going to get in you, and then you got to go to these special guys with the white coats and they're going to get rid of these diseases. And none of that is real. It's not. It's a false paradigm. It's the disease model, and it morphed from the germ theory, right? Um, and none of it's true. And so, um, like I said, health is optimal functioning of the organism, and all you have to do is arrange it so that that organism is in the environment where all of its biological needs are being met. Now, with us, we're being a little more broad. We need to be in an environment where our biological, psychological, and spiritual needs are being met. Because even if you were in an environment as a human where you were biologically okay, eating real food, human food, not dog food, going to bed early, moving around all day, doing all that stuff, but you had um, a psychologically abusive situation going on, relationship. So then you would have to adapt. Again, your mind you psychologically would adapt. And let me just cover one thing right now because it's really important for the complete understanding, and that is when I was talking about the disease theory, the disease model, which is a mythological thing. Diabetes is a disease, right? And it's going to get in you. Well, and you got to get rid of it. That's how. I mean, that's implied in our language. So the thing is, if I'm eating pasta, bread, potato, rice, and cake, I'm going to have too much glucose in my system. My body has the wisdom of divinity, the wisdom of nature. And so too much glucose, it reflexively becomes insulin resistant to prevent glucose from too much from entering, because just like we were talking before, oxidation. We need oxidation and we need reduction, but we need equal, right? And it's the same thing. So we need oxygen, yes. We need water, yes. We need glucose, yes. But we need none of them in too much. We don't in too high of amounts or too low of amounts. We need what we need in the amount that we need, and nothing more and nothing less. And so when you start to get too much glucose in, it'll be damaging. So the body has become insulin resistant. The cells have become insulin resistant. So you go uh, to a doctor and they'll say, "Aha, you have a disease. It's called diabetes, and we've got to give you these remedies to fix it." Well, they don't work, because a diabetic who goes to a doctor at age 20, at age 50, still has diabetes, but they're on all sorts of medicine. Nothing's changed, okay, except that they're probably much sicker from the progression of the condition, as well as the drugs they're taking. Now, that person, all they would have had to have done was stop eating the pasta, bread, potato, rice, and cake. Then their body would not need to go through the adaptive process of becoming insulin resistant. That was an adaptive process. And you look at any condition that we call a disease, and it's adaptive physiology. And that's why I don't use the word pathology, because pathos, so if you say naturopath, allopath, osteopath, anytime you're using the word path as a suffix, you're implying that there's something went wrong. But that's not possible, because nature functions under the law of necessity. It's neither good nor bad. The wolf eating the rabbit is neither good nor bad. It's necessary. That's nature. And water doesn't run downhill because it's a good thing to do. It runs downhill because it's necessary. So whatever's happening in biology, in your body, is happening because it's necessary. Period. And then once you realize that too, then it's easy. You take the morality out of it, right? Is this good to eat or bad to eat? Well, uh, it's good because it probably tastes good and you're getting some really good pleasure from it. But in terms of the functioning of your kidney, it's not that good, right? I mean, it's not that functional for your kidney. Or if we look more at a practical thing, and I would think people that would be listening to this sort of discussion that you have with people, are probably practically minded and like to think in terms of logical. And it's very logical. Like, if I eat this, right, is it going to um, satisfy my requirement of staying around and it being able to continue trading or doing whatever I do. That's it. Is there a practical application? And so there's two parts usually to eating. Think about it. One is the pleasure, and the other one is to turn whatever you're eating into either flesh and blood or energy or both. Right? That's why we eat. And if the only thing you're getting is the pleasure from the taste, but it's having a deleterious effect on your ability to stay alive. But and that's what happens, unfortunately. That's where we wind up. We wind up, for example, we can take this as far as we want. For example, uh, a glass of wine feels great, and if you stayed like that, you didn't go any further, and you did that, even I don't know about every night, but you know, um, that's fine. But when you take it further, right, then you go to excess. Now you start to damage things. But with that one glass a night after a day of work, and you're really like, you're stressed out and all that, and it takes away that stress. The What that did for your immune system was extremely important. It had a very important, uh, uh, measurable, practical benefit for you. So it in no way was bad. If you're on your eighth glass and getting drunk, now it's starting to damage you physiologically. So anyway, I look at really in terms of everything that we do in life and living and being healthy in terms of its functionality. And that's really important, because you'll see if you start to get ill or you become ill or you've seen anyone who becomes ill, basically they start to lose function. And that's a problem. And I think as humans, our biggest problem is that we become so habitual that the only thing that will change us, and happens to be our two best friends, is pain and suffering.
Yep.
Without it, we don't change. Oh, and the other one is, the other thing that inspires people to change is dissatisfaction. If you're
Yes.
dissatisfied with the situation, your job, your marriage, other than that, we're not going to change.
Good stuff here. Sounds like a glass of red wine is probably suitable on occasion. And I appreciate the comments on how you look at things here. And then, of course, what you said there towards the end, which we're going to come into dissatisfaction and pain and
Mhm.
suffering. I'd like to move to a different topic here and get into some other stuff because I know you'll want to talk about some of these things. A few years ago, now we saw the hand of Big Pharma working in concert with governments and government backed central planning NGOs, which demonstrated that the medical industry is being consolidated to a subscription model and making people sick, keeping them sick, and treating them like a tax or a monthly subscription model as long as possible. Is this valid in your view, and are these groups really looking out for the healing and well-being of the citizenry?
Yeah, that's very well put and it's because of the model, the paradigm. And the paradigm is the disease model. Okay? There are diseases which don't exist, right? There's no diabetes. It's not a thing. In other words, it's not a noun. Well, I guess it may be a noun, but it's a process that's going on, right? So you couldn't point to your elbow and say there's the diabetes or anything like that. Okay, it's a process, and that process is happening as an adaptive process to maintain functionality, right? And so you just have to make that adaptive process no longer necessary. All right. So in the disease model, it's not that way. The disease model said it's a thing that got into you. You've got to get rid of it, and you can take that to cancer. Now, cancer, then you can point to the tumor and say, "There's the thing I need to get rid of," and so and I, tragically, I talk to people, several times a day. That's pretty much what I specialize in now is integrative oncology, and speak to people every day. And I tell them if surgery were the answer, you wouldn't be talking to me. It's easy. Just go cut it out. Well, you can cut it out, but it's going to pop up somewhere else. Why? Because it's not the problem. It's like a poison apple tree, right? You've got everyone who eats an apple from this tree dies. So you call the tree doctor and they come in and they cut off all the apples. You haven't solved the problem, because next fall you're going to have a harvest. So it wasn't the apples. And that's why surgery doesn't, I recommend surgery when it's blocking or about to block a vital function like eating, breathing, bowel movements, etc., or it's excruciatingly painful, or it's like in a place where it's going to cause damage, like if it's a brain tumor growing too quickly or on the spine. Now that's when we'd either do surgery and or radiation. So it's not that we don't do these things; we do them at absolutely necessary times. But otherwise, if you've got a little nodule on your pancreas or a little nodule on your prostate or breast, and we cut it out, we've just caused a big. It's going to spread. And by the way, anything I say, it's 100% backed up by literature. And if you ever wanted to, if in fact, if your guests want me to say, okay, tell me that prove that what you said about surgery and biopsies is true, and I'll give you all the literature, not all of it, but enough to satisfy you. So just understand that's what it is. The things that exist in our body that we like, the tumors, are manifestations of an underlying problem, and therefore, if you don't take care of that underlying problem, you won't take care of it. It's still going to manifest. So these diseases are not there. They're not things that are there. What they are, what we call diseases, are adaptive physiology. So therefore, if you changed paradigms and we were on a healing paradigm, which is the real paradigm. So we're all on the way to health. That's the goal. The goal is health. What is that? Optimal functioning. All right. Now, because if you say, I want to get rid of, that means, okay, there's me against it. It's a military expedition. I want to get rid of my tumor. Okay, let's get rid of your tumor. Now, let's say we successfully get rid of the tumor, but you have New York Heart Association class 4 heart failure, and you need oxygen to go to the bathroom. Are you happy? No. Or you've got crippling arthritis. No. So your goal was not to get rid of that. Your goal was health all the time. And if we can stay on that road, we just want to go to health. Now, how do you heal? What is health? Health is innate to the organism. And if you ever doubt that, go in the kitchen, take a knife, slice your finger, and watch it for the next 3 days. Okay? And you'll see what happens. All right. And let's say you've got a big gash on your arm. You run to the emergency room, and the great surgeon comes in and he approximates the edges. He closes the wound. Okay, well, it's you that have to heal now. And if you're malnourished and you don't have the ability to heal, it won't heal. It'll open up and get full of pus and all that. So healing is innate to the organism. We have to always remember that. Okay? No one heals you. There are no healers. Okay? Health is the ability to heal. That's what health is. And how do we heal? We're healing every uh, picosecond, maybe. If there's anything smaller than that. Because remember, we have 36 sextillion, that's 21 zeros, chemical reactions going on in our body every second. We are making 37 million new cells per second. So our body is a dynamic happening. It's a process. It's not a thing that happened, right? And that's good news. That's very empowering. That means what I am this year, I don't have to be next year. I won't even be this next week. And knowing that, oh, then I can actually intervene. And in fact, I'm the only one that can. Because whatever doctor does to me to try and fix me, which is an absurdity, uh, I've got to live a life that will allow healing to occur. Yeah, so anyway, so these are different paradigms. So when in 1910, when the Flexner Report came out, hired by John D. Rockefeller Jr., um, Senior had his by then had his breakdown. Uh, and he turned everything over to Junior, and they he had somebody working for him called Simon Flexer, and he got his brother named Abraham, and got him together with a group of German physicians, and he wrote something called the Flexner Report, which went to Congress and changed because in 1895, uh, the average income for a homeopath or a what they call eclectic or naturopath was about 4,000 a year, and the average annual income for the allopath, like MD, medical doctor, was 1,000 a year. So the public preferred the non-allopaths, obviously. So that needed to be changed because um, John D had different things in mind. He had all this extra, what do you call it? Petrochemicals, had to make some petroleum products, and pharmaceutical industry is that. This is a brilliant guy. I mean, if he wasn't what he was, he's pretty brilliant. Um, so Flexner Report came out, and they founded public education. Um, 1918, we had the flu, uh, what they're calling uh, the Spanish flu, and had the first use of what they're calling vaccinations, and they had people wearing masks. I mean, it was pretty much what we have recently seen. Anyway, so public health was born, and now I want you to see where it's come to. So this is what, okay. So by the way, when after the Flexner Report, he actually had people's careers destroyed and or killed, and all the universities got large grants for supporting allopathic, so that all other forms of all other healing disciplines now became quackery, and that's about it. It happened. It took about 20 years of really, I mean, it was a mess. It was very dirty, but it happened. And in fact, in 19, it really, I mean, by 1942 is when it really happened. So, and the one instance I can think of that I think is relevant and interesting is there was a Dr. George Miley who was a surgeon in at Hahnemann Hospital in Philadelphia, and he was an obstetrical surgeon, right, uh, and gynecological surgeon, and so he published. He had in the American Journal of Surgery, which is a peer-reviewed journal, had it published, I think, in 1941. And he started the study at Hahnemann Hospital, 1936 or 30 or 33 or something, where he was using something called photoluminescence. And photoluminescence is taking um, ultraviolet light and using it and exposing the blood to it. And uh, so he had people in sepsis. Now he divided sepsis, obstetrical sepsis. They had had a baby and they either had surgery or they got septic because of a it was a complicated birth. Um, but he also had gynecological patients as well. So anyway, um, so sepsis means bacteria in the blood, and then you get very, very sick. So he divided into three levels: mild, moderate, and what he called moribund in those days. So mild was when they just you do a blood test, and yes, indeed, there are bacteria found. So okay, that's called bacteremia or sepsis, mild. But this person's still functioning fine. And moderate would, yes, they have bacteria in the blood and on blood cultures, and their white blood cell count is high, and they have fever and they're very sick and all that. And that's moderate. And then what he called moribund is what we probably call today in the septic shock. And um, so that was his three categories. So those with mild, he used the UVI machine, and he would do one treatment, maybe two treatments on some people. I think occasionally three, but that was very, very rare. And on the mild, 100% resolved. Moderate, 100% resolved. The moribund, 45%. Why is that? Because when someone is in septic shock, it's no longer the microorganisms that's causing any problem. It's the endotoxins that they produce. It's called endotoxemia. And those endotoxins actually uh, caused your distal arteries and all the arteries in your feet and your arms and all that to dilate. And so basically the blood pools away from you and you're like it's as if you just bled out. You don't have any more circulatory volume of your blood. And so you're in septic shock. So you're no longer dealing with microorganisms. And so our ability to help people with septic shock in 2024 is the same. It hasn't changed since then, about 45, 50%, same thing. So basically, but the point is this: he published this in 1941, and I think it was in 42, in the American Journal of Surgery. Like American Medical JAMA, which is Journal of American Medical Association, is and New England Journal of Medicine, and then you've got there's certain very important journals. So this was one of them, and then 1942, I think, is when penicillin came out. And all of that became irrelevant, was neglected, and all that. So allopaths were still trying to find ways of healing, and but the pharmacy took over, and now penicillin became used for everything. And by the way, another way to drive that home is that during the Cold War after 45, between the Soviets and America, uh, the all the countries behind the Iron Curtain, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, all of them, Russia, Cuba, even Cuba, which wasn't the Iron Curtain, but um, they didn't have access to big pharma, and so they developed. So when I was first learning about ozone and peroxides and ways of helping people that were not toxic but were actually physiological, all the research came from that area of the world because that's what they had to rely on. That they didn't have big pharma, and they had fantastic results and fantastic research, and that's where we get all of our early research from. Um, but anyway, so 42 big pharma basically finally took over, and the medical profession became sales reps. They're sales reps for the pharmaceutical industry and the surgical industry, or the procedure oriented. Now, keep in mind that in 1849, I think it was when the American Medical Association formed, and it formed about 10 years after the American Homeopathic uh, whatever they call themselves, society. So they were the first. The homeopaths were the firsts, and then the American, and they formed basically as a union to make sure all their people got their job, got a job, and stayed working, and they kept their flow up. So think about it. If you're, let's say you're involved in construction, well, you want your carpenters, you want your electricians, you want your plumbers, you want everyone to get a piece of it. All right. So now you go into a hospital. What's going to happen? You're going to be seen, and let's say you're a woman, right? Well, we're going to do a mammogram. Uh, and you say, well, wait a minute, you're going to squash my breast, cause the pain, and while it's being squashed and undergoing acute inflammation, you're going to send ionizing radiation onto it, right? And then what happens if you suspect something? Well, then we'll send it for ultrasound. Yeah, but why? Because ultrasound's more definitive. Well, hey, I got an idea. Since the ultrasound is non-damaging, why don't we just use that as the screening instead of this other one? No, we can't. And you'll never get a reason why, because there is no reason why. The reason is everyone's got to get their share of the pie. And so uh, it's like it's still a union is really what it is. And then you got to do a biopsy. Why do you have to do a biopsy? I had this big tumor here, an obvious tumor. I have to biopsy it, or it's in my colon and now I see it on my liver. I got to biopsy. Why biopsy? What do I think it is? An apple? An onion? Of course I know what it is. Well, we need to get the histological diagnosis, which really means they want to get the pathologist to give you a description of what's called microanatomy, right? So microanatomy is going to tell you, well, it's in the duct, it's in the tube, blah, blah, blah. That's all it tells you. That's all it tells you. So, like a biopsy of a woman's breast tumor, they're going to invasive ductal carcinoma. Oh my God, this guy's brilliant. Oh, he knows all this. So what does it mean? Well, it's in the duct. Invasive means it went through the wall of the duct, and it's a carcinoma. Oh, okay. So now what else, doc? Well, that's it. That's your diagnosis. But that's not a diagnosis. You just described what you saw. Well, that's a diagnosis. But hey, doc, that doesn't tell me the two things I want to know. How did I get this, and how do I get rid of it? And if it doesn't give me that information, it's useless. You could have called it banana. Doesn't matter. It doesn't help me, but it helps him or her because she can now stick it into their algorithmic sale where they can know which sales and services to sell you next, to provide for you next. And that decision tree comes down from the professional societies, whether it's the American College of Cardiology, American College of Surgery, Obstetrics and Gynecology, or ASCO, the American Society of Clinical Oncology. They give the algorithms. I mean, they tweak them every year based on certain research by pharmaceutical industry, and that comes down as um, guideline. They call it guidelines for the practicing physician, but it's really instructions. And if you don't follow it, then you're not practicing within the standards, and you're liable. And by everything, by regulatory agencies, you're liable by legal. Someone dies, you can be held liable. However, if they die and you were doing what you're supposed to do, like burning them and cutting them and all that, then it's okay. It's within the standard of care. So anyway, so that's what it's become. Now, let me just tell you why it's so important to have a disease model, why John D. Rockefeller was really an incredible genius. Because if you view diseases as separate and distinct entities, and by the way, they're growing. When I was a kid, Alzheimer's did not exist. Neither did ADD, ADHD, neither did autism. Didn't exist. They're coming, and so it's growing. It's growing. Anyway, so the implication that every disease is a separate and distinct entity implies that it has a separate and distinct etiology or path by which it occurs. Therefore, it requires a separate treatment. Ah, now we have a million drugs we can sell you, or and a million procedures. Now, I got to tell you a story. I had a lady with ovarian cancer, and her husband was a nurse, and he was there helping her. She first came in, he would push her around in her wheelchair, and then she was no longer in the wheelchair. But he came up to me one day and he said, "You know what? When I first came, this is about 6 weeks into the program. He said, when I first came, I had angina, heart pain. I had to take nitroglycerin under my tongue several times a day. And I also had high blood pressure. For years, I was taking medication, and I was a type 2 diabetic. I was taking insulin at that point. But I wanted to support Iris. I wanted her, so I did the juice cleansing with her. I did the colon, I even did the colonics. I've changed my diet. And he goes, you know what? I don't have any chest pain, and my blood pressure is normal, and I'm no longer a diabetic. And I said, well, we call that secondhand health. It's a little better than secondhand smoke. But but I want you to tell you what that means. That means if indeed those were three separate and distinct diseases, you've got heart disease, you've got high blood pressure, and you've got diabetes. Oh my God. Well, then they would not have all been resolved with the same intervention. And that intervention was what? Cleaning out and providing the appropriate fuel for this organism. And that's it. So they were understanding this. We now see that they were all different apples on the tree, different manifestations of the same underlying process. Now you have to understand that's really bad for business. You cannot have business, and I'd like anyone, I challenge anyone to show me any business in the world that is spending any effort to diminish the number of clients they have. They're not, and neither is the medical profession. And health would be the undoing of the medical industry. And therefore, that's not, and that's why they should be forbidden at least to use that word. They should not ever use the word healthcare, health, anything, healthcare or health uh, care provider, and nothing. They don't even deal with it. It's in fact, it's not. I'll tell you, people people often comment on nutrition as not being, we only get what 4 credits in school in medical school. We have one class on it, and it's the wrong nutrition, of course. But guess how many classes we get on health? Zero. So we don't know what health is. We can't define it. Ask a doctor next time you meet them. Tell me what health is. They can't. Of course, they won't say optimal functioning of the organism. They might say it's the absence of disease, but it's not the absence of anything. It's the presence of something. It's the presence of the ability to regenerate, rejuvenate, and procreate. That's what health is optimal functioning, right? To say that health is the absence of disease is like saying light is the absence of darkness. How much darkness would you have to take out of the room to find the light? An absurd, an absurd idea. But that's
Mm.
the way they have us looking at it. So anyway, you're absolutely right. So what they need to be doing, so and I'm telling you, it was set up in the early 20th century, but the public health now usurps. As you all may know, there was recently in May a a vote, United Nations, 184 countries to decide to determine whether or not, if indeed the WHO declared a pandemic, then the UN would now, all the countries of the world would hand over their sovereignty to the UN, and the UN would become the number one world government in response to a pandemic, which they did not have to prove in any
Mm.
way. Um, so that's what JD saw. I mean, I don't know how he saw this. He must be the son of Satan because 100 years later, he could see 100 years in the future. If I can get public health going, I can get this disease model going, right? And then let's get Morgan, what's his name? JP Morgan. Let's get him to buy up 70% of the newspapers in 1921, take over the media, blah. It was like, wow. I mean, uh, it, if it wasn't beyond evil, we need a new word. It's not evil. It's beyond. If it wasn't that, we would have to give a standing ovation. Incredible, incredible, incredible. And finally, in 2020, it took 2 months. Think about it. The 2 months to take down the world. Yeah, even that's, you got to hand it to them. 2 months, you had the world fall apart. That's amazing. So now they've come up with these ideas of viruses and pandemics and these injections. So um, so the
Yeah,
goal, these are the tools to achieve a goal. That's not the goal is not, it's not money. Believe me, these people have all the money in the world already. The game of Monopoly is over. They just left us Mediterranean and Baltic. Is it Baltic? We have these two to play with. They've got all the rest, and that game's over. It's beyond that. It's not money. It's power.
that's right. No, I think that makes sense, Thomas. And the organization here, when you look at this and how it's been able to be propagated, and how when you start to take over a health system and you use the government and the regulatory bodies to do your bidding, and then, as you said, have the doctors become your salespeople, and then refer to a textbook which tells you exactly what you are to sell and the
Mhm,
markups and how you get your commissions and all that.
mhm,
And then you start to propagate it further by, okay, now we need to go ahead and grab the food supply, deal
mm,
with that, which we'll talk to in a moment. And you can see how it all comes together. And then, of course, the need to immediately test this new treaty that's been put in place. Obviously, I'm sure
right.
everybody's itching to test that out. And then, with that, because of that test, well, what's to say that if the UN is allowed to administer governance and erode sovereignty and take away self-determination through these prepared events, that maybe we should also control the rest. Let's control the finances, let's control the food, let's control everything else, and let's just go ahead and set it up as we want. So if you take it to its logical conclusion, this is basically the whole game of tug of war. Take a little bit more, take a little more, you cry mercy, let's shock them a little more, let's take them to their point of mercy, cry uncle, and let's go ahead and keep pushing them basically to that edge of the cliff, and then finally you have no more space to stand and you're gone. That's ultimately what is being propagated here. I don't think there's any question at this point. You might have questioned this 30 years ago, but certainly not now.
No.
Take any comments there, but also let me ask you this, which goes into the next thing, which is semi-related, is, you've worked many, many years here as an oncologist. What is the term cancer, as many call it, and what are, in your experience, the root causes?
Okay, good. I'm glad you asked that question. Let me just real quickly, when you were talking, you mentioned the word food, and I just wanted to tell you something. You notice that there's a name of an agency called the Food and Drug Administration. Okay, so why are they controlling both? Because eat this food, you're gonna need these drugs, and there you go. So the okay, so when we communicate, we use words. And so if we're going to communicate, first of all, we have to speak the same language. And if once we're speaking the same language, now we need to have the same definitions of those words. Because if we have different definitions, then again, we're not communicating. And so that's what I always clarify when I'm speaking to someone. So because we have to both know what we mean when we're saying whatever we say. The word cancer has no real meaning. It's not like the word chair or table, which conveys information. Okay, cancer, the only information it conveys is someone born between June 21st and July 20th. Okay, it's a zodiac sign. Other than that, it has no meaning. There's no data, no information. However, the second thing that words do is it conveys emotion. And this conveys nothing but emotion. There's no information, it's just emotion. And that emotion is synonymous with the same emotion you would get from hearing the word death. So cancer is death. So when you hear that word, what happens is as if they have stolen your future. All of your to-do lists and anything on your agenda now is irrelevant. And unless you've had this happen to you, you cannot imagine what that does to you, psychologically. But you're crippled. To put it mildly, you're crippled. And basically, it's as if you've had an emotional frontal lobotomy. You no longer have access to your prefrontal cortex. You can no longer make rational decisions. And you will agree to anything. You'll agree to things that you would not normally agree to. Okay, we're going to cut this off. Okay. And then we're going to poison you. Okay. And then we're going to burn you with the radiation. Okay. You would never agree to such things. You have to be scared to death. So they call it the standard of care, and I call it the standard of scare. They scare you into submission to anything. So now, the same thing happened recently in 2020 with the Great Hoax, right? Everyone was running around afraid of an invisible enemy that was never seen, but it was there, and I wore my mask, and I didn't, but I mean they did, and so anyway, it was an invisible enemy. But so the word cancer conveys nothing but absolute fear. Therefore, it's not of practical value. Let's get back to being practical. So what is it? What happens? Well, we talked about energy before as being life. Life is energy, and when you no longer can process energy, you're dead. So the parts of our cells that do all that work are called mitochondria, and they're very efficient. They take one glucose and they make 38. Well, the whole cell will make 38 ATP molecules, which are the energy packages. For one glucose, 38, good yield. Now, and think about it, with 36 sextillion chemical reactions every second, and every one of those chemical reactions is mediated by an enzyme, and enzymes need tons of ATP. And I just give you an example, the one enzyme catalase, which converts hydrogen peroxide to oxygen and water, which happens all the time in our body, is processing that. It's doing that at little over 1 million molecules per second. Now, that just turns out to be faster than the speed of light. Yeah, it's pretty fast. Can you call it instantaneous? Yeah, you'd have to give it that word. So that's what these enzymes are doing, it's unfathomable. But that's what's happening in our body, and requiring all this energy. So we need to make a lot. I think it's estimated that we need about 1 billion ATP per cell every second, and we can't lose them, so we have to keep making them. So anyway, so now energy is number one, because without energy, the cell can't have its shape. So greater than 50% of the energy, about 54%, is required just to maintain the sodium potassium pumps that keep the cell separate from its environment. They keep it as an entity. And then once it exists, now it can do cellular work. So if it's a liver cell, it'll do liver stuff. If it's a kidney cell, it'll do kidney stuff, etc. But first, it's number one is energy. So when those systems get challenged, like they do, then that becomes the number one priority. So what happens? You're living in the 21st century, and you're living in a sea of toxins, right? In every way you can imagine, and we don't need to go into all those. And then add on to that stress, which is just like gives you a thousandfold on whatever problem's going on. So the most vulnerable parts of the cell are the mitochondria, because they have oxygen, because it's 6 oxygen molecules plus 1 glucose go into the mitochondria to become 38 ATPs. Well, oxygen is a double-edged sword. I mean, you really need it, but I wouldn't light a match around an oxygen tank. Okay, so it's flammable also on a biochemical level. In other words, it produces what are called reactive oxygen species, or free radicals. And free radicals are what cause damaging. They damage us, right? And that's why you need antioxidants because a free radical is an oxidative byproduct, and you need an antioxidant to neutralize it. So you've got all these free radicals in your mitochondria, which are if their function is starting to diminish, which is why in the morning you're feeling great, right? Because you're making, for every glucose, you're making 38 ATP. And by 2 p.m., maybe you're making 36. By 6 p.m., maybe 31. Who knows? 9 p.m., you might be making 28. Okay. Why? Because the wear and tear of your mitochondria. So you go to sleep and you didn't eat 3 or 4 hours before sleep, so your body's no longer absorbing glucose. So now your body must go through something called autophagy, to recycle all of the unnecessary stuff in the body to get energy, and that is one of them is your old mitochondria. They get eaten up, and 2 new ones pop up. Okay, so now you wake up in the morning and jump out of bed. Okay, you got your energy from having your mitochondria restored. So anyway, these mitochondria, when 30% or so, about 30% of them get knocked out, the cell has to still make energy. Remember, that's number one. So the way it makes energy is the fundamental primary way of making energy, called fermentation. In chemistry, it's called glycolysis. And now here's the difference. Glycolysis, 1 molecule of glucose, instead of becoming 38 ATP, it becomes only 2. So it's 19 times less efficient in energy production. Therefore, it needs 19 times more fuel. So the fundamental thing that happens is now a cell is pretty much relying on fermentation. It's got to do everything it can to promote that as a successful operating system. And it does. So now it's as if and what happens basically, you think of this, what happens to the cell at this point, it's like going from one operating system to another. So you're going from um, a PC to Mac. You got to change operating systems. So everything it does is to improve its ability to survive with fermentation. So it upregulates the number of insulin receptors it has, because it needs more glucose. It upregulates an enzyme called beta glucosidase, because it needs to grab glucose molecules off of other things, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It downregulates this. In other words, all it does is modify the genes that are being expressed, which define the operating system, right? They're not mutated. And why do I say they're not mutated? Because, for example, everyone has most CFC cancers have down suppressed p53, which is a It's called the guardian of the genome. It's a tumor suppressor cell, tumor suppressor gene, P21 and then P10, PTEN, and so these are all down regulated because they support glycolysis. Well, it turns out at Johns Hopkins they had a complete an entire laboratory called the Brassica Research Lab. The whole laboratory, Johns Hopkins, devoted to brassica, which is broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, bok choy, these brassica vegetables. And Jed Fahey was the PhD who ran that department. And he found out through his studies that these glucosinolates that are produced when you chew these foods um, are, have a magical properties with us. It's very interesting. There's an enzyme in one of the cells, and next to it is this other chemical, right? And when the insect bites into it, and that enzyme mixes with that other chemical, it turns into a poison, a glucosinolate. But that is not a but to isn't that interesting? It's to the insect, it's an insecticide, but to us, it upregulates phase two detoxification of our liver. It modifies our hormone metabolism. It does all these incredible things. So the cell has gone from one operating system to another. So now it can successfully exist as a fermenting cell. Okay, because it's turned this on and that off and this on. Oh, by the way, the reason I was telling you about the glucosinolates is because if you eat broccoli, if you get enough glucosinolates in you, you can upregulate that PTEN, that P21, and that P53. In other words, you can bring them back to functional levels. So if you can bring them back to functional levels, then by definition, they were not mutated. A mutation is permanent. If you have Down syndrome, it doesn't matter how much or what I feed you, you still have Down syndrome. That's a mutation. Now, I'm not saying mutations don't happen with this whole process, they do, but they are a downstream epiphenomenon. The fundamental and the only thing that is required for a cancer diagnosis that makes anything cancer is what is called the Warburg effect or aerobic glycolysis, or exactly what we're talking about, the fermentation system. That's what defines cancer. So there are no different types: ovarian cancer, colon cancer, brain cancer, pancreatic cancer. What's different about those? The first word. The second word is cancer. The first word is location. So it's the location in which this process happens. So the biology of cancer is cancer is cancer is cancer. So it's really important to understand. It takes one of the fear, these irrational fears, right? Whoa, this cancer. It's a different type. I have this rare type, and with my type of cancer, you have to. No. Cancer is cancer. It started here. So what makes it rare is it might have started in a place that it doesn't start often, like synovial. Now we're having synovial carcinomas, sarcomas. Yeah, well, that synovia is kind of like the uh, it's the tissues that are in your joints and things like that. So synovial tissue, that's very rare. Location, but what it's doing is doing the exact same thing that was to be doing in the ovary to call it. Otherwise, you wouldn't call it cancer. You understand? It's really quite simple. So these cells that learn how to exist on fermentation, we call them chronically fermenting cells, which is what they are. They're called CFCs. And if we use this word to communicate, we've communicated 100% information and zero emotion. Okay, and so now we can it's practical again. Now, okay, so this is what it is. Now I understand what it is. And then I can say, okay, how did it get this way? All right, and I can now, from this information, I can develop a strategy to resolve it because I have information. Do you understand how important that is? There's something called linguistic manipulation. All right, and it's all exists with words. All
Mhm.
right, and so and you have to understand that. So there, what for me, there what not for me. In reality, there was no pandemic. I would never call it that. By definition, those injections were not vaccines. By definition, so we can't call it that. And neither should we call it any of its really cute derivatives like Vax and Jab. And by the way, Jab came out in the BBC, Fox News, CNN, right at the time it became mandatory. And the reason it came out is because jab, if you're a native English speaker, you understand that jab is a very benign and sometimes a jovial event. You jab your friend because you're laughing together, or you walk outside and the branch jabs you. So it's a benign thing. So if we suddenly, did you get jabbed? No, I got jabbed. He got 3 jabs. It psychologically, it brought that way down. And you have to, that's how important that is. So everybody, I can't believe it. We use this word as if it never existed. We're using it. You realize how stupid we are. We're calling it a pandemic. We're calling it a virus. What the hell is a virus? Can someone tell me what a virus is? And can you prove to me that they exist? Anybody. Now, so anyway, we're using these words as if they exist. So we're in their paradigm. We're in their video game. If you ever play a video game, you realize that the only way you can get good is if you learn what the rules are, and then you become good at it. No inductive reasoning. It has no value. So you don't. It's called creativity. There's no or imagination. You don't need it. You just need to be deductive. All right. And so that's what happens. So anyway, linguistic manipulation. They use it. So the word cancer is death. All right. They use that word. They get you into the standard of scare, and you'll do anything they want. All right. And you have a disease, we're going to fix it. And blah, 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 blah. Okay, that's not the truth. The truth is this. The truth is this. My body was designed to function optimally. And, the nature of nature is to regenerate, rejuvenate, and procreate. And if that's not happening, it's because something is in the way. All I need to do is clear out any potential impediment, toxins, and restore everything that it needs. And it will naturally do it. By the way, when you say I'm going to go detox, you don't detox. Detox is what happens when you're not toxing. So you stop eating, guess what happens? Your body's going to clean up because it only has so much energy, right? So if you're feeding it all day long and it's got to keep processing and assimilating and processing and assimilating, it only has a little bit of energy left for cleaning up because that's what it does. That's part of its existence, its physiology, right? So now you stopped feeding it and it's got all this time to clean up. And that's why not eating is as important as eating, just like night is as important as day. All right. So we eat within a 6 hour window and we don't eat for the rest of the time. And when that happens, our whole metabolism is reset. It's very, and of course stop eating 4 hours, 5 hours, depending how old you are, before sleep, so that when you get to bed, you're not absorbing glucose, so that your body has to immediately go into autophagy and start to clean out all the old stuff. It's just logic. And it turns out, by the way, if we were not enculturated idiots, um, that would be instinctual, because instinct would have you go to bed when the sun went out. When the sun went down, time to go sleep, you go to sleep, because we happen to be
Right.
not nocturnal organisms. And then you'd wake up with just before dawn, right? And that's how we would live. And we would live. And what would you eat? And I want everyone here, I want you to imagine something for a moment. Imagine that you're in the jungle, naked. Tell me what's for dinner. What did God or nature, however, I don't know how you look at it, but equip you with to eat? Tell me. And what are you going to eat? What's going to look attractive to you? Are you going to choke a frog? Because that's about the only animals we could get at. No, you're going to need an instrument. If you want to eat an animal, you're going to have to get an instrument of some sort called a weapon. Because a bear doesn't, a dog doesn't, a raccoon doesn't, a rat doesn't, a cat doesn't. We do. All right, so yeah, we could tear things apart and stuff like that. But we'd probably be more, you know, apple looks pretty good hanging there, those bananas, So in other words, our hands were not in our instincts. So I mean, just, you know, but none of us, no, there are some people on Earth who I have a great admiration for who actually are still Earthlings. And what I mean by that is if you were naked in the jungle, could you survive? Do I know what plants to eat? I don't know, would I kill it if I killed an animal? God, I wouldn't want to eat the corpse like that, I'd want to definitely heat it up somehow, right? And then I have to figure out how to make fire and all that, because I certainly don't eat. I don't like corpses. I don't, and I'm not going to eat the animal alive. So, it'd be a big learning curve there to figure out all that out. But anyway, the point is this: we don't know how to live on Earth. We're very good at getting online and whatever we can do with these ridiculous things. Our idols. These are our idols, by the way. The science of this century is, I mean, the religion of this century is science. And these are the temples that we go to. And we all day long are giving our heart and soul to these temples.
Right.
Um, and that's it. So, but we don't know how to survive on Earth. We don't know how to, we don't know what food is. We don't know how to obtain it. We don't know that which I consider the most important parts about being an earthling.
Good stuff there, Thomas, and hope the audience is appreciating some of this. And I think it's providing different perspectives, which should be considered. And we, of course, encourage our audience to consider these different perspectives and also see the logic in them as well, which in this world, much of that logic is missing from the discussion and from the actions that we see. Just with respect to CFCs, and I don't mean CFCs in the climate change global warming community that eats the ozone layer. I mean CFCs that we're talking, the real ones here, and how that is the correct term. And I appreciate you bringing that forward. But talk just briefly. This is a little bit of a plug for your businesses, Thomas. You know, just up with the basics. We don't need a master class. We could probably separate another podcast for that. But talk about some of the basic treatments that you would approach for someone who has CFCs, and what are the basics there?
Okay, yeah, excellent. Well, I always step back and I go about 30,000 feet above and take a bigger look at the context of where we're at. And if you understand that, if we go back to the fact that these are adaptive physiology is what's going on uh, um, with our body when it's having difficulties. Um, and so we realize that what are we adapting to? And we're adapting to environments that don't provide our biological requirements. And that's because we're not living in biological environments. We're living in artificial environments. Everything's artificial. And just like I couldn't eat tinfoil and I couldn't eat saran wrap, I couldn't turn it into what I need. Um, it's the same thing. So I have to eat organic material. Organic doesn't mean, see, the term that we think organic, what we think organic refers to is foods that were raised or grown without the use of chemicals, right? In science, it's referred to carbon chemistry. The chemistry that um, the chemistry of carbon compounds is organic chemistry. And so we need to eat organic materials to turn them into what we are, which is carbon-based organisms. Right? So that's what we need to do. But we don't. As a matter of fact, we buy food, what we call food, in packages. And what's required for a package is a list of ingredients. Now, if I gave you a banana, I wouldn't need to put a label on it. Even if I gave you a steak, I wouldn't have to put a label on it. Okay, now, if I have to put a label on something, that means I'm hiding something. And if I could actually read that, if I had a master's in chemistry, I could read that label and I could say, oh my God. Anyway, so that's what we're eating, that's where we're living, and we have all this. So we have the reason we have all these incredible adaptive physiological processes going on, diabetes, hypertension, metabolic syndrome X, cancer, all the ones you want to name. The reason we have all these is because they're adapting to an environment. So therefore, fundamentally, what we have to do to resolve these issues is to get back to Earth. Come back to Earth. Come back to our niche, our biological niche, to our habitat. And that's what we need to do so that we no longer need to adapt. So fundamentally, that's what we're going to do. Now, I can't uh, help anyone in that regard in a setting that is artificial because it makes no it's an oxymoron, right? However, that's what I'm stuck with because we're in urban centers, and so you're going to come to the clinic, and the problem is the clinic. We have the word patient, which I don't like. It's a pass. To say you're a patient means you are something that is passively receiving something. You're being fixed by the brilliant doctor, and you're stupid, so you didn't know anything about your body, so you brought your body to the doctor, and the doctor's fixing it. The whole problem with that, one of the big problems with that scenario is that there's a driver to this car. It's not like dropping your car off at the garage. This body has a driver, and that driver actually is more important. The being inside, and then that has to do with how we think. So what we do is understanding that you have chronically fermenting cells and that they came to be because of an accumulation of toxins. By the way, age. Let's talk about aging for a minute, because if any of you are aging to the point of realizing that you're losing function, you'll appreciate this, right? And you'll understand. So what is aging? Aging is, as our body. Well, here's what happens. You look at, if you've had children, you'll notice that your 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 6-year-old, 7. I don't. Well, at least when I was young, we ate real food, or close to real food. Um, they had large bowel movements, and maybe a couple or three a day. Now, look, people are having one small bowel movement a day, or that's if they're regular, but some people 2 days, 3 days. So our ability to eliminate diminishes over time. Now, not only with regards to our major systems of elimination, like breathing and skin and uh, kidneys and bowels. Not only that, but at a biochemical level, just the ability for the cells to clean themselves and to go through autophagy and all that. Though that diminishes. And as that diminishes, there's an accumulation of toxins slowly. And as those toxins accumulate, the cells now have to deal with that toxicity instead of doing their cellular work, because if they don't stop the toxicity, they're going to be dead. Once the toxicity requires more of the energy than the cellular work, we see what's called organ dysfunction, right? I'm having some kind of organ dysfunction. Anyway, and that's what we would call disease and all that. But anyway, when that level of toxicity is impairing the function of ovaries, testes, thyroid, pituitary, adrenal, and those organs, glands, are no longer producing as much of the hormones that they normally do, then we see the actual phenomenon of aging. We see menopause. We see in men andropause. We see wrinkling. We see erectile dysfunction, loss of libido. Um, we see loss of type 2 muscle fibers, which is strength. We lose, all these things, the ability to balance. So that this is when frailty, all our we start losing our teeth. All these things are happening, and so, and like for a woman, it's loss of her menstrual cycle is obvious, loss of libido, and vaginal dryness. For the woman, it's very obvious when it happens. But what's not obvious is that she's having osteoporosis, and that she has her risk for heart attacks is much higher. Her risk for dementia is much higher, cognitive decline, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the unseen parts of menopause. And the same goes for males, which is andropause. Now, we don't have any specific event like cessation of menstruation, but we do notice that we're not quite as libidinous. We're not quite as horny as we used to be. Our libido goes down, and we're not quite functioning the same. We think of that as, you can look at it unidimensional as, your sexuality, but when you realize that when a man loses testosterone, they also lose their motivation. They also lose their, um, yeah, they get insomnia, they get depressed, I mean, it's a powerful power. And by the way, um, I have all these segues, but I can't help it. The organ with the most receptors for testosterone is the heart, then the brain, then the muscles, and then the metabolism, and then the genitalia. So if I ask someone, which I do during an initial history and physical, uh, about their libido, if someone says, I don't know, it's not quite what it used to be, then I know that their heart's not getting what it needs, their brain's not getting what it needs, their muscles not getting what it needs. But if someone says to me, "Oh, it's great. I'm fine. I'm blah blah blah," okay, then I know already. So that's in the importance of that question. But just as a side note, every hormone, everything in our body has multiple functions. Okay, so it's not just one. Um, but anyway, so what do? We first of all we cleanse. We got to get rid of all the reasons why this came to be. We detoxify. How do we detoxify? Let's take fresh green juices that you made, vegetable, and you're going to add enough. For example, celery, cucumber, kale, and spinach. Okay, because the celery and cucumber gives you enough volume of fluid, and then the kale and the spinach, you've got like almost everything you need. If you don't, I don't like spinach. Okay, so switch it out. Doesn't matter. And then add a little lemon to take away any bitterness, and then add some apple for sweetness to take away the sourness. I don't like apple. Okay, so change the apple, put it a pineapple. Whatever you need to make it taste good so that you look forward to it. I don't want you to drink it because it's good for you. It's because you like it. Because what that does, there's something called psychoneuroimmunology. All right. And if I am eating it because I'm supposed to and I don't really enjoy it, at a subconscious level, I'm feeling deprived. And that deprivation directly suppresses natural killer cells, directly suppresses turned on CD8 cells. So it directly suppresses the immune system. All right. So therefore, I have to love. That's why I'm writing a book called Why It Has to Taste Good. All right. And because if it doesn't taste good, it's not good for you. However, the opposite is not the truth. But that is true. If it doesn't taste good, it's not good for you. So it's got to taste good. So whatever, if you got to put a few extra apples to drink it today, you do it and just keep drinking, because the goal is to drink 3 to 4 liters a day and not eat until you're peeing all day long. You stop around 5 or 6 just so you don't pee all night, but but you're getting plenty of nourishment. In fact, you're getting in 2 liters of juice, which, because you've taken out all the fiber, you're getting more nutrients than the average person gets in 6 months in one day. So it's highly nutritious. The only two macro or nutrients you're not getting are fat and fiber. Other than that, you're getting all the amino acids, you're getting all the healthy carbohydrates, you're getting all of the phytonutrients, vitamins, chelated minerals. Yeah, you're getting all that. So it's highly nutritious. So you could actually do it for 6 months, and but you need to eventually start eating fiber and fat, otherwise you'll die. So, but it allows you well, I'm going to lose weight. Okay, good. Lose weight and then regain it. What are you talking about? You're going to lose fat. All right. Well, fat holds two things. What does it hold? It holds energy and it holds toxins. Okay. So all the toxins that we don't pee out or come out of our bowels uh, are still fat soluble, and they get stored in our fat. And so 4 times a year, 10 to 14 days on each occasion, you should do a cleanse. It's like driving your car. You wouldn't expect high performance if you didn't change the oil for 2 years. All right. And so you shouldn't expect high performance from your body if you don't change the oil. And changing the oil is drinking a ton of juice or water, so that your body will eliminate all of its fat. And I mean, even the fat around the organs called visceral fat. Eliminate it all, and then you'll get it back. And now it won't have to. It won't. You can try to not if you reduce your exposure to toxins so that the fat doesn't acquire any toxins, but it will anyway because you live on the planet. So 4 times a year at the two solstices and the two equinoxes would be a great time, just to give you, for the times to do it. So we get rid of the toxins, and while we're getting rid of the toxins, which also involves colon hydrotherapy, lymphatic therapy, it involves movement, keeping your body moving throughout the day, and balancing your hormones. So we help the gut heal, we restore balance to the hormones, we restore balance to the immune system, we restore balance to the central nervous system, which includes the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic, sympathetic. And those are the systems that we restore balance to, because there's no human being that could ever comprehend how to even envision what's happening with 36 sextillion chemical reactions every second, each one depending on the other. No one could conceive of that. So you're not going to figure it out. You're not going to find the answer to fix it. No, you're going to restore balance to each of the systems that we've identified, and it will, of its own divine intelligent nature, function, right? And if we look at allopathic medicine, like me, medical doctor, and even naturopathic, and any of these guys that are going to intervene, if you look at them, how do they compare to the indigenous medicines of Chief Rolling Thunder, of traditional Chinese, of Ayurvedic, of Africa has, every, in South America. I mean, there's all these indigenous medicine. All they ever want to do is restore balance. They don't have the audacity to think they're going to fix something that doesn't need to be fixed because it's already working out of necessity. It's doing what it needs to do, right? So they just restore balance, and that's really what we do. So we help do that. So we, uh, uh, and at the same time, we want to hasten things. So we use intravenous therapies, non-toxic botanical therapies like vitamin C, like ozone, like artesunate, which comes from wormwood, and a variety of different things that challenge these CFCs, these chronically fermenting cells, based upon their physiological deficits, their enzymatic deficiencies. They don't have the enzyme to metabolize something where healthy cells do, so they will die because of that. They won't die because we poisoned them. And that's what we call a metabolic therapy instead of a cytotoxic therapy. So we have all these metabolic therapies. And the thing about CFCs is they're very clever. You give someone a really high dose of chemotherapy, and on the third dose, the CFCs are saying, that was pretty good, give me some more. Meanwhile, the rest of our cells are, my hair's falling out, and I'm sick, and I'm all that. So you don't want to go head to head with CFCs. It's like you don't want to pick a fight with a guy that just walked out of Gold's Gym.
Mm.
You want to get the guy that was sitting at his computer all day and hasn't stood up. All right. So anyway,
And Thomas, let me just step in here real quick and have you keep going. What about these treatments? Can can let's throw another wrench into the spoke.
yeah.
Can vaccine injured people take these treatments? Does it help reverse the impacts from vaccine injury? Maybe people that have vaccines, maybe have cancer or have one or the other. Talk about that.
Yeah, well, that's the answer is as complicated as what those injections are. And again, linguistic manipulation. I wouldn't ever use the word vaccine, so I'll call them bioweapon effects. So the problem with these bioweapons is this: very reputable guys like McCulloch are finding mRNA and spike protein in these formulas, and many other scientists are not finding any of that. And what they're finding is what they're calling synthetic biology. And so there's a group in Spain of the PhDs and MDs, and they're doing research, and even here in the U.S., and they're not finding any, but they're finding these synthetic these they look like parasites or micro some sort of microorganisms, but high levels of poisonous chemicals don't stop them, and neither does like heating up the water to boiling stop them. But they put them in a Faraday cage and they stop moving. And so whatever they are, they're getting energy from EMF. They auto, what's the word? They self-assemble. It's very bizarre. Now, so the spike protein part, if we go with that aspect of it, these spike proteins are inflammatory, and they cause inflammation. And if they get into the arteries, they'll cause clots. If they get into the brain, they cause, neuron dysfunction. Yeah, they have a predilection for reproductive tissue, so both males and females lose productivity, the ability to reproduce. Um, and so these are the effects of it. So in using if we would go with the spike protein idea, then we know that if indeed it was the mRNA that modified the DNA so that the DNA in the cells is now changed and it's producing spike protein by the trillions, then you'd want to be able to at least, since you can't change the DNA back now unless you have another specific mRNA that's going to go in there and redo that or take it out, then you've got to get rid of the spike protein. And one thing that we have found that does, and there's been a lot of publications started with the Japanese, and that is an enzyme called nattokinase, which comes from fermented natto or soybeans. And nattokinase is very good because it stimulates plasminogen, which is that part of the clotting system that breaks down clots. And so each system in the body has an on button and an off button. like estrogen has progesterone. So estrogen makes things build up, progesterone makes them build up. So everything's got an on and off. But in clotting, you've got fibrinogen, which becomes fibrin, which becomes clots. And then you've got plasminogen, which becomes plasmin, which dissolves clots. And you've got to have a fine balance because you need to be able to clot when you get cut, and you need to be able to stop clotting when you've taken care of the leak. And so, anyway, so if you can stimulate plasminogen, you can keep your blood thin, as they say. And I think it's one of the reasons Japanese live 10 years longer than the rest of us. But they also have found that it dissolves spike protein. So that's pretty cool. So you can get it online. It's not kinase. You can get, uh, uh, I think it comes in 100 milli, whatever it is. The milligram is equal to heating unit. I guess they call them heat units or HUs. Anyway, take 200 of them twice a day on an empty stomach. Because if you take it with food, the enzyme will be used to digest the food. You don't want that. So take it on an empty stomach twice a day. Um, and or even 3 times a day. And that way you're going to continually be eliminating spike proteins in case that's what's going on. Now, if there's biological entities, which they are, and I've had scientists send me my pictures of what's going on in a microscope. Then that's a whole new system, and that means you'd have to really protect yourself from EMF as much as possible. And and we all know how to do, either you can, there's a couple of reputable companies out there now selling Faraday clothing. I think Longo is one. I got some t-shirts and pants, underwear you can wear over your underwear. So you just change, you don't have to wash them every day. You can just change your regular underwear and then keep those for a while. And then you have to wash them, of course, but, and then a cap. And so if you can protect yourself that much from EMF, that's good. I wouldn't drive a Tesla or any other kind of electrical car unless it's like sitting in a black widow's nest. And so avoid those sorts of things, and get as healthy as you can. So will those programs, the things we do, work? Yes, absolutely. Because on top of whatever's happened to them from getting those injections, their only ability to survive it and to do well is to have a very healthy functioning physiology, which includes immune system and heart, everything. So your way you're going to do that is by living the same way, we bring all your systems into balance and do all that sort of thing. Will ozone help? Absolutely. Ozone, when we do ozone intravenously, what it does is it's gone within a nanosecond, but it starts to, so like there's different ways of getting ozone, but it's gone within a nanosecond. But what it does is it increases the oxygenation of the blood, and it stimulates the immune system, and it stimulates the production of other oxidants like hydrogen peroxide to eliminate things that you don't want, right? Because remember, oxidation is our friend and can also do some damage. But so you want to stimulate pro-oxidant enzymes to kill certain things. So yes, ozone would work. So would high dose vitamin C for the same reason. So would artesunate. So all these things would work for the CFCs and to some degree disable whatever's going on. It's really mysterious what's going on because I've got extremely reputable people with good research papers showing both things. So my assumption is this, that there was a major global clinical trial, and they've got all sorts of arms of these studies, and that's why we're noticing different um, um, differing amounts of or percentages of deaths and disability in certain countries more than other countries, right? And so I think the countries, like I've heard it said by one of the top guys up at the WEF, that of the 500 million people they want left, they'd like them to be Japanese and Chinese, or Japanese and Korean, because they're very compliant, right? And us Caucasians are not. We keep asking why, and so obviously Europe and North America are the first ones that need to be gone out. But I just saw a report that Singapore's had the highest all-cause mortality ever in the last couple of years. It's pretty crazy. So
yeah. Well, it's very interesting, some of those things you say, and I guess I should rephrase and call it bioweapon injured. And then
yes,
as far as the amount of doctors that have had their licenses pulled in these regions that you and I would suspect would pull licenses, record
Mhm.
amounts of licenses pulled, and have to ask why would you do that unless there was something really behind the scenes here. And I think people are starting to actually realize this. But I want to stop there on that because we could talk about some other things. There's a few topics I'm going to eliminate here that we should talk maybe for a member only podcast, which has some very good information, which I want to avoid for this podcast, just for really at this point, the sake of time. But can you first talk? I want to talk iodine. I want to talk cholesterol briefly, and then I want to talk food before we wrap up and a few other things. But just briefly, talk about the importance of iodine.
Excellent. Okay. Iodine, if you look on the periodic table, it's in the vertical column of what are called halogens. So you have chloride, fluoride, bromide, and iodide. Iodide is the largest of them. The reason they're in the vertical column is because they have, just like, remember, carbon and silicon, they have the same chemical reactivity. And so all of those halogens have the same chemical reactivity, and they react with transition metals to form salts. So you've got sodium chloride, sodium bromide, sodium iodide, magnesium fluoride, magnesium chloride, um, potassium chloride. So they all have the same reactivity. So the purpose of thyroid hormone is to deliver iodide to the mitochondrial membrane, and then it depolarizes the mitochondrial membrane, causing it to produce more energy. And which is why hypothyroid is tired, you're gaining weight, and then hyperthyroid. So, too much, not enough energy. So remember, so thyroid is the energy carburetor of the body. It maintains the energy production. And so now the problem is this, only the Japanese and Koreans who eat traditional diets are getting enough iodine in their diet because they're eating lots of seaweed. All right, so seaweed, not seafood. So like wakame, which is if you've ever had miso soup, it's that little square of seaweed on top of the soup. Um, wakame um, can increase the concentration of iodine 30,000 times from what is in the seawater. So that's pretty amazing. And but whereas the shrimp and the seafood, they don't do that. They use it, they have some, but they don't have anywhere near the amounts that seaweed does. So the average Japanese person, from the time they're 3 or 4, are eating 13.8 milligrams a day of iodine. All right, and of course, look at us. What are they calling the recommended daily allowance? Like 600 micrograms? Yeah, right. So anyway, so they're getting that. Now, iodine um, is because if you do a thyroid test, it's T3 and T4, and the 3 and the 4 refer to the number of iodides. So iodine can be iodine, which is molecular. It's two iodines is I2, or iodide, which is again forms. It's a anion that forms with sodium iodide. Or anyway, so that iodide, as I said, is delivered to the mitochondrial membrane. So if I do my T4 or my T3 test and they turn out to be normal, what I don't know without a mass spectrometer is whether or not I have 2 bromides, 1 chloride, and 1 fluoride, or 2 iodide. I don't know what is there. But if I don't have 4 iodides and 3 iodides, then I'm not going to have the function. So that's it. So even though my test may be normal, I'm not functionally what they call euthyroid. EU is the prefix for healthy or normal functioning, healthy. Um, so you're not euthyroid even though you're tested. So that's why we don't trust the test. So we have people check their uh, axillary body temperatures, which is your armpit, in the morning before you get out of bed, before you start walking, to even go to the bathroom, because walking generates heat. So you want to get your basal body temperature, because temperature is a measure of energy output. And uh, so uh, if you do it 5 days in a row in the morning before getting out of bed, and if you're below 37.8 on the average, you average it out, then you're hypothyroid. Or in the Fahrenheit world, if you're below 97.8, then you're functionally hypothyroid and you need thyroid. And so what you do is you take a natural thyroid while you replenish your iodine deficiency. So you would get iodoral or Lugol's tablets of 25 milligrams of iodine. You take it once a day, nighttime, doesn't matter. And then in the morning, you would take Thyrovans, which is an easily obtainable natural thyroid medication you can get online. It ends with a Z, Thyrovans. It's from New Zealand. It's from organic bovine. And and so you do that for 2 weeks, and then while you're taking it, you would recheck your basal body temperatures. If you're still below, you might take a second one, like 30 minutes before lunch, and empty stomachs, always on empty stomach. And then you titrate. You figure out a way to get enough thyroid, because thyroid not only is energy, thyroid also is very intimately connected with the immune system. So it's very important. And by the way, for women, the only other organ in our body besides the thyroid who's able to extract iodine out of the blood with any uh, degree of efficiency are the breasts. So the breasts have the sodium iodide transporter system just like the thyroid. And that's necessary because the nursing newborn is going to need the iodine for thyroid. Otherwise, they get a condition called cretinism, which we know of, which is mental and physical retardation. So they've got to have it. So the breasts have to get. So the breasts are very much dependent on iodine, and so are the thyroid. But above those functional requirements, the more iodide you have in your body, it'll be stored in your interstitial fluid. And why is that good? Because let's say you got a tumor and it starts to grow. As soon as it exposes a positive cation, uh, iodine will latch onto it and open up and it will die. So
Mm.
iodine, that's the same way in which iodine is uh, used to when used to have your mother would paint iodine on your cut, on a sore, on an abrasion, and it would prevent it from getting infected. Or if you're hiking in the woods and you get some pond water, you can pour some iodine in it and be able to drink it. So it's an antimicrobial, and the same mechanism, it kills CFCs. So it's pretty good. Um,
Mm.
that's the importance of iodine, and it's very, very, very much overlooked.
That's an interesting one. And let's tie it in for some of our uranium radiation commercial nuclear power folks that it might be
Yeah,
listening in. Why is iodine utilized for areas of increased radiation exposure?
right. And that's because the thyroid will pick it up by you making sure that it's a healthy iodine rather than, because see some of the byproducts of radiation can function as an anion, but they're radioactive, and so they'll get incorporated into the thyroid gland and produce thyroid cancer, thyroid CFCs. So if you've got enough potassium iodide in there, and taking care of all the requirements, then there's no it, the radioactive material can't affect it. So you've got to make sure you're getting it. And so the reason we have to take it is because we're obviously all iodine deficient, right? And that's the problem. We're iodine deficient, but we're certainly not fluoride deficient. It's in all the water systems. It's in toothpaste, which you have to avoid because remember, fluoride accumulates in the pineal gland, and as I told you, they bind with a transition metal. So what is attracted to fluoride in the body, which is most prevalent, is calcium. You get calcium fluoride. You get calcified pineal glands, and which is responsible for your uh, biochemical relationship with the earth. It's called the circadian rhythm, right? And so that gets disturbed. But so there's two other hormones produced by the pineal gland, and they both are no longer, able to be produced. Yeah,
Hmm.
so that's it.
The other one I wanted to discuss is give us a little bit of your view of what cholesterol is. Has it been weaponized by Big Pharma? Talk about cholesterol and talk about the benefits and what cholesterol should be in the correct context.
Very important. Yeah, it was right after the Korean in the 50s when the Americans were fighting the Koreans. They would find the dead soldiers on the battlefield, 18-year-old, 19-year-old kids from Korea and America. And when they did autopsies, they found that the Koreans had very little um, atherosclerosis, coronary artery uh, atheromas in the coronary arteries, whereas the Americans did. And that's when they started the whole thing. And they became called. There's a town in Massachusetts. What's it called? Framingham. Yeah. So they started the Framingham study. It was a prospective study where they were following all these millions of people over the years and looking at different parameters. And they came to the conclusion that cholesterol is damaging. And then they said it was LDL. LDL is the form of cholesterol that delivers cholesterol to the tissues in the body because cholesterol is actually made in the liver. Now, cholesterol is um, it's a fat soluble as opposed to water soluble. It's a fat soluble molecule that is necessary in the membranes of our cells to maintain their shape and fluidity. Okay, because if we didn't have any cholesterol, they would be too flexible. So this keeps them kind of, in the right shape. So there's a certain amount of cholesterol we need. The other thing is that cholesterol in the membrane serves to protect the membrane. So, and we make cholesterol in response to that. So, if we were to take a vacation at Chernobyl or at Fukushima for a couple 3 days, and we came back and we measured about 2 weeks later, measured our cholesterol, it'd be around 400 or 500. And that would be because it was upregulated to protect us because it's in the membrane and it serves as an antioxidant. It prevents oxidation of the membrane. So that's very important in and of itself. Now, it also forms the backbone for all of our sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. So without it, we don't procreate, there's no species. All right. It also forms the backbone for cortisol, which is our stress response. Okay. It also is what becomes vitamin D when exposed to the sun, to the skin. It also is what becomes bile salts. So we're able to uh, process and eat fats and oils, which are one of the macronutrients. Um, and it also, very interestingly enough, cholesterol can, I mean, the vitamin D that is made from the cholesterol, the vitamin D cannot be transported in the blood it can't just float around. It has to be carried. And it's carried by it's called the vitamin D binding protein made in the liver. And that vitamin D binding protein that grabs the vitamin D and carries it around, also has a secondary function, and that is that it activates macrophages. And macrophages are those cells in the immune system that function to bridge the innate immune system with the adaptive immune system. So very, very important. So if you wanted to knock out one of the big players in the immune system, if that was your goal, you'd knock out macrophages. Um, and so anyway, so vitamin D, having a low vitamin D level in your blood means your liver will make less vitamin D binding protein, and therefore less of the ability to keep your macrophages activated. That's cholesterol. And so it's not like when you look at the tests for the statins, when you look at the tests for the research studies with statins, the endpoint is lowered cholesterol. So yes, if you take these drugs, indeed you shall lower your cholesterol because it blocks cholesterol synthesis in the body. But it, it doesn't change quality or length of life. Okay, it only lowers cholesterol. So, but as it turns out, that because it's lowering cholesterol is about 75% of the fats that are in our myelin sheaths, which are around our nerves, and in the white matter of our brain. And so there is a direct correlation between the onset of taking statin drugs and the rise of something called Alzheimer's. So um, it's not only not bad for you, it's absolutely necessary. What you want to avoid is eating somebody else's cholesterol. You don't need their cholesterol. You need your cholesterol. It's almost like taking fish oil. Well, you don't need fish oil because fish oil is looking at the only essential fatty acids we have are um, omega 3s and 6s. And we also have a saturated essential fatty acid called C15, but the other ones are unsaturated. But so we have the omega 3s and 6s. The derivatives of the omega 3s and 6s, or of the omega 3s, are EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, and DHA, dicosahexaenoic acid. EPA and DHA, and that's what they talk about, right? This correlates with brain function, cognitive function, and so they're giving you fish oil because they have a lot. Now remember, those are derivatives. The parent, which is the only ones that are required, essential for life, are the omega 3s and 6s. So we will make the amount of EPA and DHA that we need. Now, fish oil has a lot more because the fish that they use to get this oil from are cold water fish way up around Alaska. And so they need to have a lot of polyunsaturated fatty acids so that their blood doesn't freeze. Or, it doesn't work too slowly. We don't. So tropical fish won't have that amount of EPA and DHA. Anyway, we don't need those amounts. And as it turns out, the more of those that we incorporate into our cell membranes, the more peroxidizable our membranes come. In other words, the weaker our cells become from using EPA and DHA from fish oil. So what we really need to do is to have ground flaxseed oil, ground flax seeds, ground hemp seeds, chia seeds, all these things in their natural sources to get our to get those needs met. But anyway, that was kind of a segue from cholesterol.
Thomas, thank you for that. That's very good. And that starts to cover off some of the myths out there about cholesterol and why it's been weaponized as well by
Mm-hmm.
big pharma. You mentioned the statin drugs as the main issue there that obviously is very bad for those who are taking it. I want, just for the sake of time, again, I'm going to skip over a few of these issues. I want to jump over to back to food for a moment, Thomas. There's a trend that you were well aware of vegan diet and this association in part that I think is being propagated out there of attaching vegan somehow to lab grown foods, which are two different things. Whether it be attempts to mimic meat for purposes of climate change or even lab grown vegetables and the synthetic, systemic, and controlled form of food distribution to the masses. I know there's a lot in what I just said there, but maybe you can separate vegan from lab grown trends because it seems like vegan is being weaponized towards encouraging people to go towards lab grown foods, which is obviously a poison.
Yeah, exactly. Well, again, it's always important to have any discussion to make sure we have the same definitions of terms. And so let's take the word food. If someone were to say to me, what would be the best food to eat? I'd have to say, okay, for what species are we talking? All right, because the food for a fly is not the same food as us, right? Um, so every species, and as we talked about at the very beginning, the anatomy and physiology of an organism defines the way in which it obtains energy in its environment or its food. So we're talking about what is the food for a human. But anyway, what's food in general? Food is that which, when ingested by an organism, can be converted into flesh, blood, and or energy. On a very simple perspective. And then poison would be that which cannot be and must be eliminated. And so if we use those as broad categories, then we realize that there is no perfect food because even a beautiful big organic apple is going to have some part of it which can't be digested and will become feces, right? So there's just differing degrees of it. So what can be incorporated into? Now remember, hunger is a set of physiological responses and biomechanical responses of walking and moving to obtain to satisfy either a nutrient and or energy deficit. And once that energy and or nutrient deficit has been satisfied, that behavior stops. That's hunger. Unlearned, it's natural. Non-specific, the organism will eat anything that's there that is within its instinctual framework, and it's easily satisfied. Now, unfortunately, humans have a mind, which we think is our greatest tool, which it is, but it's also our greatest adversary. So we eat because of appetite, and appetite is the exact opposite. It's learned, not unlearned. It's specific, such as cravings, and it's never satisfied. Right? So it's the complete opposite of hunger. So hunger is born of physiology to satisfy a nutrient or energy deficit, whereas appetite is a conditioned learning thing. And I got to have a pizza. I got to have, or if you're from a small village in China, I got to have some live monkey brain. Whatever your appetite is, and we all think that our appetites define food, but they don't. They just define our cultural upbringing. So anyway, so now that we understand that about food, and we understand, so what is it that we are fitted to eat? And if you look at our anatomy and physiology, you pretty much understand that we're pretty much plant eaters, just like gorillas, chimps, and bonobos. Chimps eat a little bit of flesh, less than 5% of their diet, but they do it not as nutrient, but it's part of their establishing male hierarchical systems, right? So they go on these hunts for hauler monkeys, and the biggest alpha male will kill the most monkeys and bring home the most, and he also gets the most females for having bringing all that. But when Jane Goodall was doing her research, she realized and found that They expended more energy in obtaining that than they did from eating it. So therefore, it wasn't satisfying a nutrient requirement. It was, and it had all of the social things. Now, the cousins, the bonobo, the orangutan, and the vegan, and the gorilla would be vegan, except they eat insects off each other, and they're cleaning each other. But if they ran across an egg on a bird in a nest, they'd eat it. But I'm just saying they're pretty much that's not what they're attracted to or what they eat. So that's what we would be if we were not enculturated. But if we're enculturated, we'll eat anything that our culture says, from live monkey brain to spiders to in Thailand, they eat a lot of insects, and Cambodia loves spiders, and it depends. And if Tennessee, they eat bull testicles. And in Mexico, they eat the lining of the small intestines called tripe. So it depends on your cultural. So we're enculturated, and we are omnivores by perversion, not by design. Because all omnivores, real omnivores that can eat either anything, have a snout, like a raccoon, a dog, a rat, a bear. Okay, they have a snout, and the reason they have a snout is because they have to have the physiology for killing and eating animals. They have to. Now, for us, we couldn't go bite its neck like the lion does, because our cheeks would get in the way. And we don't have sharp, piercing teeth. If anyone thinks we have canines, I want them to go to the zoo and piss off a lion and take a look at what happens when he opens his mouth, and then you tell me we have canines. We have the teeth that are in the position of the canine position are actually function as incisors. So food. So we have certain requirements of food. Now, we need protein. Absolutely. There are 3 macronutrients: protein, fats, and carbohydrates. And we've got to have as much as we've got to have. Now, one way to find out what are the protein requirements of an organism, and to try to find out the truth, we never can go read a book or talk to a person, because a person's selling something, even if they don't know it. So I like to use as my ultimate reference nature, because nature's selling nothing. And the way you inquire of nature is through observation. And so observation would tell you that mammals are born helpless, and they have their mothers produce milk, and milk is the perfect food to take them from helplessness to viability, and then weaning occurs, because at that point milk becomes not a good thing to cause tissues to grow and proliferate quickly, because that's what CFCs do. So weaning is pretty strict in all mammals except humans. But anyway, in that milk of each species is the perfect combination of nutrients for that animal to go from helplessness to viability. And so when we look at the amount of protein, which is in the form of casein that's in these animals, we'll see that of the calories obtained in human milk, 5% are from protein, 11% in horses, I think 23% in cows, about 32% in dogs and hyenas and wolves, and 38% approximately in all the lions and tigers and cats and stuff like that. And the guy that tops them all off is the rat, 49%. Now, the amount of protein in that milk correlates with the number of days it takes to double size and weight, so that the organism can become viable. And so in the case of a rat, they double in 4 days and they're gone. They leave the nest because they had a high casein count, right? Whereas an elephant is going to breastfeed for, I think, 2 years. It varies. So in other words, so that the time in our lives when our protein needs were maximum, because we were doubling in size and weight. Remember, an adolescent doesn't go from 4 feet to 8 feet. It's not doubling. It's growing fast, but not doubling. So in infancy, we're doubling. So we have to have a maximum of all our nutrients. And nature tells us, nobody's book, nature tells us that 5% of our caloric intake needs to be protein. Well, as it turns out, bananas are 5% protein. Spinach is 49% protein. Dead cows are only 33%. Broccoli is 36%. So understand that the whole idea that we're not getting enough protein is a marketing thing, a marketing gimmick. The two of what we call diseases that occur from protein malnourishment are called Kwashiorkor syndrome and marasmus. I have never admitted anyone into the hospitals, and I do not know of any other physicians that have ever admitted anyone in the hospitals in America with Kwashiorkor or marasmus. We just don't see it. Okay, we don't see protein malnourishment. And that means pretty much since now, granted, a banana has 5% protein, but it's not a complete protein. Like I'm not saying it is, but it's got 5% protein. But if I eat enough different vegetables, then I'll get all the amino acids I need. Remember, I need 9 amino acids. There are 20 amino acids altogether in nature. Okay, plants make all 20, animals make some portion of. So we require 9. If we get those 9, those essential, we can make the other 11. They're non-essential. So whatever provides us with those 9 is what we call a complete protein. So obviously eating the part of the corpse of an animal will give you that. But it turns out that chia seeds have 18 amino acids. They're only missing 2 of the non-essential. In other words, they have all the essentials, so they're complete. So this hemp seed. Spinach is 49%. Same as rat's milk, right? Spinach is 49%. Now it's missing 2 of the essentials. So you eat spinach and, bok choy or spinach and whatever, garlic or whatever, something else, and you're gonna have the complete protein. So it's not all the amino acids. So the idea of requiring amino acids from eating dead animals is it's a false idea. Now, one thing remember, when you're eating protein, you're eating it for the amino acids. Because if you eat a protein, your body has to break it down into individual amino acids, and they will be absorbed. You can't absorb 2 amino acids together. It's called a dipeptide. You can't absorb 3. You can only absorb 1 at a time. So you got to break it down. So when you eat the plant's already in the amino acid form pretty much. It's got proteins, but it's easy. It's much easier broken down, and it comes in a package of phytonutrients and vitamins and chelated mineral. It comes in a really nice package, whereas the amino acids that come in a part of a corpse come with the fats and other things that are not desirable. The other thing is that since eating animal corpses is not really within our instinct, we have to heat them up. We have to cook them. I guess we eat sashimi once in a while, sushi, but that's about it. We don't really eat raw anything else. Pig, anybody have raw pig? I'm sure there's someone out there eating raw pig and raw chicken, but it's not common. So we have to heat it up. And we know that when we heat anything up to a certain temperature, we produce what are called Maillard chemicals, which are poisons, such as acrylamide. And we know that heating up a fat causes aldehydes, which are 100 billion times more damaging than free radicals, which is why it's kind of I say this because, first of all, it's true, but secondly, because it makes people stop and think, and that is it's safer to smoke a cigarette than to eat a French fries. What? Turns out it is. French fries is going to give you aldehydes. The cigarette's going to give you a ton of free radicals. So the free radicals are eaten up within a minute at max. They wouldn't even take a minute. And the aldehydes produced by the French fries, they're not only like free radicals that are on the outside of a cell. They go right through the membrane into the nucleus, and they stay around for minutes instead of microseconds. So that's why they're far worse. So that's my point of that. So frying, so cooking and frying. So frying food is like, if you want to poison yourself, fry it. So then when you look at food, so food is that which can be converted, right, into flesh and blood. So now nature produced tomatoes. It did not produce tomato sauce. And none of us, I guess I can say that pretty much just certainty that none of us put our fingers in fire. I think even the most uh, intense masochist wouldn't do that, I don't think. So we don't put our fingers in fire. We don't put our clothing in fire. We don't put our money in fire. In fact, we don't put anything into fire that we value because fire is destructive. So where did we get the bright idea to put the products that nature produced for our nourishment into fire? if you think about that, I think it came. I think it arose. Cooking arose around the time of flesh eating. Flesh eating came when we left our natural environment. Our natural environment was the tropics and subtropics, where there are tons of vegetation and water and sunlight and all easily obtainable and all that. But when we left and we started to migrate north and south, and we were in areas where there wasn't as much vegetation, then we started to eat animals. And they just done. No matter what you say, man, we got to cook it. It just doesn't quite. I guess we could do it, but it's not. We wouldn't enjoy it like a dog does, or like if you were walking your dog and you came upon a corpse, your dog would get down and smell it. I don't think you would. I have a feeling you might walk the other way. So instinctually we wouldn't get down and smell. Why are they smelling it? Because they'll be able to tell by the scent whether or not it's still okay to eat. About 72 hours. Yeah, and then it becomes food for insects and microorganisms, and they know that. We don't know that. Anyway, but it's distasteful.
Tie us in with the
Yeah,
this whole trend to grow food
right,
artificially in labs. Yeah.
right. Now that was it's part of See, I think we should call them Bill Gates burgers, but you know, Monsanto wanted to own the food supply. If the more of the if you want to go to war with someone, you're going to take over their food and other fuel supply, fuel. Um, what do you call it? Yeah, full fuel supply, food supply. So the food, if Monsanto can own all the seeds, which is their goal, and then genetically modify them so that they now own them and you can't use them without their permission, then they've taken over the food supply. And that was one part of it. And then they genetically modified food so that it causes, contrary to what they say the reason is, it actually causes damage. Now, the world has pretty much been convinced of the fact that humans need to eat animals. And so using that, you got to realize these guys are masters at psychology, sociology, genetics. I mean, because remember they own Harvard, they own Oxford, they own all the great universities, right, through their endowments. So they've had all the greatest think tanks throughout the decades, the 100 years more in each subject, whether it was biology, sociology, political science, genetics. So they know pretty much that we've been pretty much convinced that we need to eat animals. So they're going to use that and now talk about you bring in other things like carbon, like you suggested, and what. And then there's also enough data to show that eating the animal is actually not going to be that good for you, and turns out to be like that. So yeah, let's grow it in the laboratory. Let's make it so that you can enjoy what you should be eating, but let's make it safe and easy, and we can still keep the environment right. Because as you know, to raise enough cattle to graze on the grasses to feed the earth, we're going to have to cut down the rainforest. So it's not ecologically smart. So ecologically, it makes more sense to grow it in the laboratory. So what are we growing? And that's the question. What are we growing? We don't know. It's probably genetically modified stuff. And I don't know if they're cloning the genes that are necessary to make muscle tissue. I'm not sure what they're doing. I don't even know what that stuff is. But I know that it would probably be safer to eat a hamburger than to eat an ultimate burger. Um, fried hamburger than eat an ultimate burger because who knows what it is. But knowing that there are nano aluminum particles and nano barium particles in our what I'm saying, and there's also nano-sized graphene oxide in our foods. In fact, there was a study that just came out, several, showing that there's graphene oxide in all of the dental anesthetics, the Marcaine, Bupivacaine, lidocaine. They're putting graphene oxide in them. And so the dentists that I know that are biological dentists are scrambling to find places where they can get these anesthetics made without graphene oxide because you can't do dental surgery, which is necessary, without it. So
Hmm.
it's everywhere. So in our food supply, so the whatever this is doing, whatever people think is happening from eating this laboratory grown stuff, I don't know what it is. And I don't know what it comes from, and I'm sure we won't. We'd have to use, as I said, a mass spectrometer to find out exactly the molecules that are in there. But it's definitely not. We weren't designed. Now remember, if humans produce it, this is a very important category. Divine intelligence, and I'm not sure how you look at that. I look at divinity as fabric of existence, of intelligence, its intelligence. I mean, divine intelligence produces nature, and nature turns out to be perfect, right? A bear has a bowel movement; it's nourishment for other organisms. So in nature, there's no waste. Everything is a process of recycling, and so, and it's perpetual motion. It keeps changing, perpetually changing, and it's perfect. Now that's nature, and that's the result of a divine intelligence. So the result of our intelligence is that which is called artificial. So archaeologists go on digs looking for artifact, meaning they're looking for something that's unnatural so they can say that humans were here. So the results of our intelligence is artificial. So I would say that we are artificial intelligence. And I would say that our progeny, these computers that we're calling AI, are not AI. Okay, what they are is we've transferred all of the data we've obtained, all the what we call information. But the one thing we didn't transfer and we can't transfer is soul, heart. And so you can't negotiate with AI. So that's the difference. So it's artificial intelligence, a clone of artificial intelligence. And as we know, the clone is never quite as good as the original. So, I have a different name for that. So anyway, making this food, making this stuff in there is artificial. Whatever's made in the laboratory is not natural, it's artificial. And that which is artificial cannot be turned into flesh and blood. I cannot eat saran wrap. All right. Now, if it's partly it's got part of the stuff I need and not, then my body will just have to work with it and try to get rid of it. And I'll wind up incorporating molecules that are not natural, not organic, and I will eventually change. It will change the the constituents of my body, and it's not satisfying a nutrient need. And by the way, you can get all this that you need from plants. So the problem is that fish, which should people have eaten it for millennia. Now the fish are full of nanoplastics and full of nuclear waste. And I mean, it's safer to eat out of your toilet than to eat out of the oceans nowadays. So there's really no place to obtain it stuff naturally either. So it's really we're in quite a dilemma, and it's going to come to the point where we have to all have our individual um, gardens, and we have to know, and we have first to start gathering seeds so that we have non-Monsanto, non-genetically modified seeds and grow our own food, because I don't know where it's coming from. We don't know, and if they say certified organic, that means absolutely nothing. You don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
as you know, that stuff Apeel, Apeel, that synthetic thing that Bill Gates made to put on vegetables to show that they were safe or whatever, is now, if you even with that Apeel, it can be certified organic. Bottom line, I don't think it's food.
Yeah, it's all corrupt. The certifications are in fact a lie. And I see how some of the trends and some of the fads, if I can call it that, have been weaponized to sell this new industry that's been created. And so it's always interesting to look at how these things are manipulated. So Thomas, I appreciate the time here, and we had some other stuff to talk about, but I want to wrap up here with just a few final things. First, I'll talk about your services in a moment and have you just talk briefly about some of your services specifically and how they can get in touch with you. But before that, just talk about how people, after listening to this podcast, can get involved with doing what they can do to get the word out about some of these issues, how they can help themselves, and maybe just a few basic tips on what they can do in their own community locally to try to help get out the intelligence here and help people move along with the right choices.
The first step is learning, understanding it, for oneself. And there are books to read, and I'd be happy to supply you with a reading list that I would suggest, right? To give you a good foundation so that you understand this. Because I can tell you that unless someone has an extreme prejudice that prevented them from actually listening to what I said, then they knew it's true. Because I don't. The thing about the truth is it stands on its own authority, and the only reference it really needs is a moment's reflection. Here, count to 10. You learn how to count to 10 when you're like young, and then they go, look, 1 plus 1 is 2. You say, yeah, So the truth is recognized, and that what I'm saying is just basic fundamental truth. And if you have any questions, you can always research it or ask me. But so the thing is to learn it, and once you've learned it, and realize how essential it is to understand it. So like if we define food, and I have to eat. So let me make sure I'm eating food because I need it so I can stay alive. And I want to stay alive because I like living. I enjoy it. And whatever my work is, I want to keep. I often tell people I think my biggest most uh, probably the central habit in my life is breathing. I really love breathing, and I want to keep doing it for as long as possible. So I'm going to do everything I can to continue to breathe. And so eating food and um, um, so understanding and so I think educating and understanding it. So I think forming groups. They used to, I don't know if they still have it, but I remember when I was working in the U.S., there was like meetup.com. You could go to meetup groups, and I had meetup groups for food and all that. Now, by the way, raw food is not raw; it's real. Raw is painful. I don't want to be raw. I don't want anything to be raw. I want it to be so. Anyway, it's real because the earth made it. But anyway, so I think getting together, getting a reading list, becoming knowledgeable, and finding that out, and then realizing this that your biggest adversary, your biggest enemy, is not Bill Gates, but it's your appetite. Okay, and understanding that your appetite is going to tell you crazy. Okay. But anyway, what can you do as an individual? First, let's get rid of the toxins because those toxins may manifest not as CFCs, they may manifest as a coronary artery, and you have a heart attack or dementia or stroke. By the way, we've got to do one podcast on the mouth. I don't know when the mouth left the body, but somehow it did. We wound up with dentists and doctors. But as far as I can tell, the mouth is still in the body and it has an extreme relevance. Do you know that 80 to 90% of all systemic illnesses are not associated with, but actually originate in the mouth? And the two of the biggest times in history that changed our mouth and therefore our the reasons we died was around 10,000 years ago when we went from the hunter-gatherer to the Neolithic and we started farming. And then the next one was up about 1850 when the Industrial Revolution and we started processing foods. And it all had to do with the increase of carbohydrate and cooked and processed carbohydrates, which changed the microflora in our mouths. And I mean, do you know one of the biggest problems in one of the big worldwide epidemic pandemics is edentulosum, loss of teeth. Loss of teeth is because of periodontal conditions. And do you know that loss of teeth correlates with dementia? It's amazing. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on and on and on. So learning how to eat, learning what food is it. So here's what I suggest everyone learn to do. Learn to respect that, understand that, and just like you take care of your car and you change the oil, change your oil 4 times a year. Change it. Go to bed when the sun goes down. And I promise you something. If you go to bed 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, you'll wake up naturally around 4. You will get more done between 4 and 6 than you would have in 8 hours. You're going to be more efficient. Anything you read at that time, you'll have to read only once, um, and you'll have incredible energy. So, like a New Year's, you don't only have to make one resolution, and that's that. And if you make that resolution, you go to bed early, then you'll have something called willpower to do all the other things that you know you should do. Because there's not a cigarette smoker alive that doesn't know they should quit smoking, or an alcoholic that doesn't know they should quit drinking, or an obese person that does. They don't. We all know that, but why don't we do it? And we don't do it because of Can you believe it? I contend that it's because we don't go to bed early. Not get enough sleep. 11 to 7 is 8 hours, but it's the wrong timing. You're not going to get what you needed. You got to go to bed early because we're diurnal, and that's just the way it is. And you can argue with it and not want it and all that, but it doesn't change the fact that that's true. And so I would say learn to go to bed early. But let's say you're young or something, you still want to go out and party on weekends. Okay, do that, but it's not what you do occasionally that hurts you. It's how you live your life in general. So in general, go to bed early. In general, eat within a 6 hour window and stop eating 4 hours before you go to sleep. Okay. In general, eat nutrient dense foods. get your nutrient needs met. Move all day. Here's the other thing. Going into the gym for 2 hours and freaking out is just as unnatural as sitting at a desk for 6 hours. Okay. In nature, if it was 7,000 years ago, from the morning to night, we'd be bending and stooping and lifting and walking and carrying, and that's what we'd be doing. And we'd be powerful, strong people. So, if you have a desk job, and a lot of us do, just set your clock, and every 90 minutes you get up, go outside or wherever for 10 minutes, and just do 10 minutes of jumping jacks, push-ups, whatever, crawls on all fours, forward and backwards, jump rope, just for 10 minutes and go back. Doing that is far more healthy than going to the gym. It's amazing. And also, we also know that building up those type 2 muscle fibers I was talking about that we lose with aging is due to resistance and accelerated. So sprint, run real fast for 1 minute. Another one is stair climbing. Do you know 70 seconds of stair climbing increases natural killer cells? It doubles them. 70 seconds. Sit to stand or stand to sit. So you're sitting in a chair, stand up at the count of 3 or 4, and sit down at the count of 5 or 6. And hold, and that decelerated resistance is really important. So do that 5 times and in one session. And maybe do that 2, 3 times a day. Things like that you can learn to do in your environment where you are. All right. And then eating, drinking, and having that window. Remember, the time that you're not eating, your body's cleaning. And so if you went to bed let's say you go to bed at 9, you stop eating at 5, that's 4 hours. You're going to get the most out of that night. Now you can eat again at 11 a.m. That gave you 18 hours of not eating. That means your fasting insulin levels will come down, which means your fasting glucose dynamic will be healthy. Because remember, fasting insulin glucose dynamic underlies a lot of, well, they call it pathology. I call it adaptive physiology, but very, very important. So anyway, just living healthy. Remember, there's only one way to get health. There's no other way. You can't buy it, you can't negotiate it, you can't demand it, you can only earn it. Okay, and it's from healthy living. There's no other way. And you're not going to get it in an IV. You're not going to get it in a pill. And that's just it. And it's not just food. It's also your bowels, right? You have 5 feet of colon, or same as saying 1.5 meters, all right? And it's full of feces. And I don't know many people that put 1.5 meters of feces in the toilet every day, meaning you are therefore hanging on to this waste, and this waste is continually being reabsorbed. It's called enterohepatic circulation. It goes right back to your liver. Every 4 minutes, your liver gets a wave of sewage. You think that, so don't give your liver any other work to do. It's pretty busy, right? And also your immune system is, anyway, so keep your bowels clean, mouth clean, eat real food, go to bed early as often as you can, and keep moving all day long. And then the last thing is this: learn to shut up, which is hard for me. It's hard for all of us. And what I mean by shutting up is when thinking is not voluntary. It's something that happens just like your heart's beating. You don't decide to think. All right, you're not digesting your food. Your food is being digested. Okay. Same with your thoughts. Your thoughts are happening and they drive you crazy, which is why, as soon as you're alone, you got to grab a book, call a friend, put music, whatever. Can't be alone with my thought. So you got to learn to stop thinking, and that's what meditation is. And if you're a religious person and you pray, that's beautiful. After the prayer, instead of rudely getting up and walking away, sit there for 2 minutes and listen for the answer. That listening is meditation. Meditation is listening with your heart and soul 100%. And when you're doing that, you're not thinking. And the moment you stop thinking, your immune system goes through the roof. It's called psychoneuroimmunology. And there's data on it. They've had catheters in people. So learning to not think is very, very important. Because otherwise you're going to think, remember, 80% of human thought is negative and 90% is subconscious. So we don't even know what we're telling ourselves. We don't know our internal dialogue, really. All right. So you've got to learn. That's the other big one you've got to learn to control. And the only way you control is to turn it off. Yeah. Last thing and this is maybe one of the hardest. That's stop lying. We lie all the time, and because we're taught to. You have to. So
very good considerations for people to start implementing in their own life, and start with one or two and work your way up as you can
Yep.
fill them all in. I think that's the way to go there. So appreciate that. Just to wrap up here, if there is someone listening in and they want to engage your services to meet with you about their own health situation, or for a friend or for a family member, talk about whether or not you're taking new patients and how they might be able to get in touch with your group as a starting point.
Sure. Yeah, I have the An Oasis of Healing in Arizona, An Oasis of Healing. I shouldn't have been so specific with the language there. I should have just called Oasis. Nobody remembers An, and they wind up somewhere else. Anyway, you can go to stopmakingcancer.com. That's how you can get there. It's easy. So that's the place you can call if you're anywhere near North America. Otherwise, over here in Asia, we're Oasis Healing Asia. We haven't even opened yet. We're almost open. However, I was doing consults with everybody, and I worked on a home program for people to get well, and it was Stop Making Cancer. It was like a home series, me and a few other people that were important, trying to cover all those aspects we talked about. It was a Stop Making Cancer. I had to use the word I hate, but if I said stop making CFCs, no one would know what it's talking about. Anyway, there's that, and that's on my own website, which is drlodi.com, which is drlodi.com, and on there also is all the podcasts and lots of stuff. So I used to take consults. The reason I had to stop is because that's all I was doing. I couldn't do anything else, and I'm limited. I could do 6 or 7 a day because then I have to write them up afterwards. And so instead, what I've done is I formed these 3 groups, and one is general health and healing. The other one is parasites, because I made a webinar on parasites. You can find it on drlodi.com. Parasites, which is, I mean, after I made this, I've got people are calling me up. And this one lady came to visit me. She's from Argentina. She had things crawling out of her head that had wings. They would develop wings, and I said, "What?" And I didn't believe it until I saw it. People have them coming out of their nose, eyes, vaginas. It's I didn't even know how it was, and those are the ones that you see. So anyway, I have a second group, parasites, and if you're in that group, you automatically have membership in the first group, health and healing, and then the third one is CFC group, and if you have that one, you'll be in the other twos automatically. And what they involve is weekly closed Zooms, so that it's more like it's personal. We can interact, and instead of taking everybody individually, we can take people in groups. And if you don't mind saying, you can keep your screen off and your name hidden and all that, but just talk about your situation. We can all talk about it because we learn from each other. And so one would be CFCs and all that sort of thing. So we can do it that way. But if you're really sick, you call Oasis in the US, or Oasis Healing Asia over there, or go to my website, drlodi.com. And every Sunday night, US Eastern Standard Time. Over here, it's Monday mornings. So it's Monday morning, 7 a.m. for me. It's in New York, it's 8 p.m. Is on Instagram, Rumble, LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok, all of them. It's a 2-hour live stream where I just answer questions. So it's kind of fun. I love it. And of course, there's no charge. And they're all recorded. If you go to any of those platforms, you can see past ones. So that's how to find me. Those are all at Dr. Thomas Lodi, Dr. Thomas Lodi, except for X.
Yeah.
It's Dr. Thomas Lodi MD, because I couldn't, yeah. So it has MD, but the rest are all Dr. Thomas Lodi. But it's on Zoom, it's everywhere. So they're trying to kick me off. A lot of times I get cut off in the middle from saying something. Do you realize this is weird? TikTok, which has the most ridiculous, bizarre things on it, they shut me down for talking about propolis. Bepol. What?
Mm.
That's controversial.
It's funny, these platforms, they move into censorship because once again, you start seeking power through these platforms. Just to remind the audience, so drlodi.com, drlodi here, and then also Thomas does have a podcast as well that's also can be found there. Well, Thomas, look, it's been a long one here. I think
Yeah,
we've covered a lot here, so let's wrap up. And look, I think
sure.
this has been a really good master class and a wealth of knowledge coming from you on this. Of course, we missed a bunch of other topics that we should talk about, but perhaps you'll come back if you enjoyed this. And just wanted to say again, thank you for taking the time to talk to our audience and everyone you just heard from Dr. Lodi and Thomas. Looking forward to having you back in the future.
Andrew, if your audience wants it, we can take different, subjects and get more into detail with specific subjects. I'd love to do that as well. All right, bye bye then.